At night, a beautiful pink-haired girl woke up in her room, looked anxiously at her hands, and could not understand what had happened to her. She wasn't fully awake yet, so she didn't realize what she was lying on. The only thing she was well aware of was that what she was lying on was too stiff and not like a sheet. And then the girl finally woke up and noticed that she was lying on top of a naked man who was sleeping sweetly in her bed. So, it was clear to the beauty that she was sitting on top of Archduke Glenn, who, in addition to the fact that up to half of the clothes were not dressed, so in addition, and hands were tied. The girl was frightened. She didn't understand what was happening now, and took it for a very realistic dream. The man began to come to his senses, opening his beautiful eyes, and the stranger almost fainted from the oil painting. A half-naked, bound, handsome man in her bed, a pervert's dream. It was only now that she realized it was all her doing, and she realized she'd made a mess of things, and maybe even lost her mind. And her name was Vivian Lewis. So, she, Vivian Lewis, for some interesting reason, kidnapped Archduke Gwen and brought him into her house, into her room, into her bed. It all started when the girl was 14 years old. It was then that the Duke caught her eye. It was at a debutante ball, a place filled with the hopes and dreams of noblewomen. Back then, Vivian dreamed of meeting a young, handsome man and starting a romantic relationship with him. The girls who were also at the ball said that the Duke was very handsome, some saying that they fell in love with him at first sight. It was there at the ball that Vivian also saw him, as he stood on the steps and surveyed the hall. He was 18 at the time, and at 17 he inherited the title of Duke. It was then that the people around him began to treat him in a new way, not as a child, but as an equal. Then he sparkled like a diamond, and she fell in love with him. She was the type of person who fell in love easily, and her heart fluttered as soon as she met his gaze. For 7 years, Vivian was crazy about the young man. It turned out that she was good at drawing, and it helped her keep her sanity a little. She used her talent to the fullest and drew Duke Glenn all the time. The girl watched, or rather followed the young man from afar, so that no one noticed her, and then drew all the moments she had seen with him from memory. Of course, outsiders did not know about her fanaticism, but she could not hide it from her family. And she was glad that she could paint the Duke herself, because rumours would have spread if she had commissioned an artist to paint thousands of portraits of the Duke. Vivian herself realised that she wasn't acting quite normal, and if the Duke found out about it, she would be in trouble. Her room was a shrine to Glenn's name. There were portraits of him hanging on the walls everywhere, and there was even a pillow with his face on it in the bed. The girl came into the room, pressed the pillow with the Duke's portrait on it, and said that it was hard to think of anything better. She did not want to marry, though her parents were persistent in offering her more and more candidates. She wanted to continue living in her world. The moment the girl started up her shuffle again about not wanting to get married, another girl appeared in her room and asked her if she was up to her old tricks. Vivian immediately recognized the stranger. It was Marina, so in joy she rushed to hug her. Marina wondered how long her friend would be unrequitedly admiring the Archduke. The main character was not going to stop doing it, as dreams about the Duke made her happy. She liked to draw his portraits and write fanfics about him. But Marina was worried about what the girl would do if she stayed alone. Marina reassured Vivian and said that she had to go to a place for business, so she asked her friend to look after her bag. But before leaving, she also asked the girl not to open the bag, as there were quite dangerous things in there. After that, Marina ran away and said she would be back in a while. Marina knew how to use magic and was also trained at the capital's academy. Her city was far away from here, so she lived with Vivian while she studied, but she always felt obligated to her family. Vivian was looking again at the album that contained the Archduke's portraits, but she wanted to look in her friend's bag more and more every second, after she'd told her not to look in it. But she remembered that Marina had never shown her anything dangerous, so she thought about the fact that maybe one time she could look in the bag after all. As it was, but Marina always treated her like a little sister, so it was already starting to annoy the girl, so she picked up her bag. So she opened the bag, and there were so many of her drawings of the Archduke, but they were all torn. Vivian began sweeping and apologised to the drawings for not being able to keep them. She was sweeping up herself, as she thought it would be quite embarrassing if she called the maids after she had made the mess herself. Then she saw an interesting black ball. Then Vivian took the ball in her hands and started looking into it like a mirror. It was a strange object, so she decided to put it straight into her bag. But what happened was that she tripped and fell and broke the balloon, not knowing what to do now. That was all the girl remembered until waking up in her room, but she was well aware that she herself was to blame for the situation. Vivian was self-defeating until she heard the Archduke's voice saying that he would not mind if she continued what she had started and brought it to a conclusion. The girl's imagination drew different pictures. For example, Glenn should have been angry with her and tried to kill her because she infringed on his honor and dignity. But she couldn't understand how she had managed to kidnap him and tie him to the bed. And he was calm as a boa constrictor, and he teased her all the time. Vivian was in complete shock, as she did not expect herself to kidnap an archduke at the age of 21 and bring him to her home. She realized that soon the officers would come here and see her room hung with portraits of the archduke and think she had gone mad and gave her the creeps. Glenn observed the situation and beckoned the girl to come over to him. Vivian realized that the man was still bound and needed to be released. The girl became upset and ran up to the archduke and began to free his hands from the restraints. But it turned out to be not so easy, as the knots were very good. She couldn't believe that she had hurt the man's body. Vivian began to cry as she saw the marks on his hands. Glenn began to comfort her, as such wounds were nothing to him. The girl recovered a little and asked the young man about realizing that he had been kidnapped by her. But he admitted that he even enjoyed being tied up. Vivian did not understand why the young man was still very kind and affectionate to her, for they had never socialized before. She thought he was crazy, so she showed him her middle finger and asked him how many of them she was showing him. The man answered this question correctly, as well as the next, but she didn't understand the reasons for his behavior, as she had the impression that he was enjoying the process. And then he looked at her slyly and said that he had heard rumors that she wanted intimacy with him. Then he threw her on the bed and added that he'd known about her desire since the day they'd first met. Glenn kissed her hand, and it suddenly dawned on her that he was still in her room, and the fact of her bigotry for him was also made known. So, the girl asked herself to think and understand the reason for the Archduke's behavior. She was still in her bedroom, but nevertheless, Glenn was also there. Vivian realized that the man had probably mistaken her for a stalker, and was now waiting to see what demands she would make, which was why he was stalling. The girl realized that no matter how one looked at the situation, it was obvious that her intentions were clearly shameless, because she had tied him up and tried to use his body. She needed to explain to him that she had not done it on purpose. Vivian had always enjoyed watching him from the sidelines, and it was enough that he remembered her as a nice girl who greeted him like so many others. The girl wanted to try to find an excuse for her action, so she said that his kidnapping was not planned. She reported that recently a strange black ball had fallen out of her hands and shattered, and immediately afterward events had happened to her that she did not remember. Because of her obsession with Glenn, the girl never entered into a romantic relationship with anyone else. Until she was 16, she still had hope for reciprocity, but a little later she realized that it was impossible. She was from a poor family, so she could not expect to marry an archduke. Nevertheless, there was a possibility that she wanted to kidnap a man, and the bead clothed her hidden desires. Vivian realized that if her parents and Cassian found out, she would be very disappointed and angry. The Archduke was silent for a long time, and then smiled enigmatically and said he understood everything. Vivian was dazzled by the man's beauty. He summarized the information and said that if he understood everything correctly, she had first taken a strange object, then she was enveloped by smoke, after which she did not remember how she had abducted it and brought it to her room. The girl hoped for understanding, but Glenn said he couldn't believe such nonsense. Vivian realized that she was trapped, since the Archduke had many female admirers. If they found out about her act, she would be finished. Marriage to this man was no longer her goal in life. She just wanted to live as his groupie, and that would be enough. Come to think of it, it started with a few pictures of Glenn, but soon there were so many that there was nowhere to hang them. Now she wanted to go back in time and not touch Marina's bag, so out of frustration she cried. Seeing this, the man started wiping her tears, and then he hugged her. Vivian had the impression that the Archduke was very much enjoying the situation, for he was not angry, but bantering at her and hugging her and comforting her. It turned out Glenn had a terrible temper, but at the same time he was very handsome, and such a combination pissed the girl off. But there was another problem. Glenn asked the girl what they were going to do next, since his knights would be on the scene any minute, which meant she was facing jail. This caused Vivian to start pulling out her hair in a panic. The man told her to stop hurting herself and pulling out such beautiful hair, and then offered her one way out of the situation. The Duke offered her to be his mistress. It seemed strange to her at least, but the man's eyes were undeniably beautiful, but she couldn't agree right away without even meeting him. Their social statuses were different too. He's the Grand Archduke of the Elfidar Empire, who controlled half the country, who had power on par with the Emperor, so he can't marry the daughter of a little-known count. Plus he's already rumoured to have a fiancée, a princess from another country. Vivian weighed the pros and cons of becoming his mistress, but she also had a few conditions, so she proposed a love contract to the Archduke. Glenn got a little upset even, and said that such an agreement meant she didn't want to date him for real. But since she already wanted the contract so badly, he asked how many months. The girl first answered 6 months, but then changed to 4 months, and the young man's expression grew angrier and angrier. Glenn, on the other hand, realised that he didn't like either option, so he increased the deadline by a year. Vivian didn't know how to react to everything, as the Archduke demanded her vows as well. As he felt that 1 year would not be enough for him, she had no choice, so they vowed to honour the rules of the love contract for 1 year. But after the vows, Glenn's speech became official, as he said that since they are in a relationship, he will treat her with respect. The girl wanted to send him home quickly, as her room was full of traces of crime, but he didn't want to leave, as he didn't want to spend a long night alone. Undoubtedly, he wanted to continue what he'd started, but here she was completely oblivious to that very thing. First, the man gave her a hint, telling her that he hadn't taken off his clothes himself, and then he pointed to his shirt, torn to shreds on the floor. Vivian was shocked at the realization. Glenn stopped the girl from her hair-pulling activity and said that even for such an activity she looked adorable. He asked her not to worry about messing things up, because the important thing was that she wanted it that minute. Vivian didn't know if she was doing the right thing. Yes, the man showed favour, but the Archduke she knew rarely smiled, and was the ice prince all the girls were crazy about. Whatever it was, the girl was worried that the feelings he had for her were the result of the magic item she'd broken. And Glenn was already hoping that they'd start doing something very interesting. But Vivian was interested in what he thought of her room, not other things. The man hesitated and looked around again. The girl was sure he was going to say the whole thing was disgusting, but he said he realised now that he liked her very much. Vivian had calmed down a little, but there was still something that troubled her, and it was important for the Archduke to know what it was that was bothering her. The girl was worried about how far their relationship would go. She didn't realise whether they would be holding hands, hugging, or even kissing. But the man slyly asked her what she wanted to do more of everything with him. Vivian had never thought of such a thing, but since they had a contract, she thought embrace would be enough. Glenn snickered, and the girl assumed he was against it, so she decided that holding hands would be enough in their case. But that was exactly what he wasn't happy with, and even though they had a contract, they were still in a relationship from that day forward. He touched her lips and said they would do absolutely anything since they were now a couple. And Vivian was beginning to realise that she had gotten into a dangerous game. The girl said that there were rumours of his marriage. She understood that for him, a marriage of convenience was normal and did not raise any questions, because aristocrats often married not for love, but for profit. This applied to her family as well. Clearly he had wedded someone of royal blood. The guy hugged the girl. Vivian thought she was going to faint, and the young man asked permission to kiss her. He then looked at her and said that they would kiss first, then move on and eventually get married. And then she didn't even notice him kissing her. Only now did she realise she was kissing a man, and it wasn't a peck on the cheek. She forgot how to breathe during the kiss, but she was afraid they might be seen, and it was as if he didn't notice or care about any of that. Now the Archduke looked at the wall of portraits and asked the girl how long she had liked him. Vivian could not tell the truth about her bigotry, but replied that it had always been something unattainable and beautiful to her. She was well aware that talking about a serious relationship in their situation was foolish, as in a year everyone would go their separate ways, pretending that nothing had happened. Glenn, on the other hand, kissed her hand and said that he hoped she was comfortable around him, and then dumbfounded the girl by saying that now they could tell her parents that they were a real couple. Their conversation was interrupted by a noise outside, and Vivian decided to see what was going on. It was expected, but still unpleasant, as the Archduke's knights were already crowding there, ready to rush in. Glenn also went to the window and praised his men as they did their work quickly and efficiently. This time Vivian ran around the room looking for something to cover the man's nakedness as she tore his shirt. Here she realized that she could have borrowed things from her stepbrother, so she asked the young man to wait for her in the room. So Glenn stayed behind to wait for her, and she went into Cassian's room to look for a shirt. Pretty quickly, she found a suitable item that had previously belonged to her father. And then she heard knights and servants talking about how perhaps Lady Lucian had kidnapped the Archduke. The girl realized that seeing Glenn in her bedroom half naked on the bed would be the end of her. So she ran straight into the room and was glad that no one was there except the Archduke, who held out a glass of water to her. The girl happily started drinking, but also asked the man to put on a shirt. He did, saying the shirt was very soft and fit perfectly, then thanked her. Vivian was embarrassed, as she was uncomfortable accepting the praise since she had torn that shirt herself. The butler and the knights came to the bedroom door. The girl realized that she and the Duke were kind of dating, but even though now she wouldn't face time for kidnapping, her reputation would be ruined. Vivian realized that she would probably have to live with her parents all her life. Vivian realized that she would probably have to live with her parents for the rest of her life. The butler was bursting into the room and the Archduke seemed amused, but still asked the girl if she was ready for the show. She nodded affirmatively. Glenn assured Vivian that she would soon get used to everything, but she felt like she was walking on thin ice. The young man was aware that if she hadn't kidnapped him, he would have been able to live a normal life. Though they had already kissed, the girl decided that the Archduke had better make a quick exit through the window from her room. But nevertheless, it was time to open the door. And when she did, the butler nearly died, for he thought his mistress had become a criminal. The girl, however, tried to convey to him the idea that she was not a criminal, but the servant could not understand what the Archduke was doing in her room then. Vivian reported that it was a secret date, and the servant cried and said he didn't know how to look her parents in the eye, but then remarked that the girl had wised up a bit. The girl started shaking the butler and proving to him that she wasn't crazy, and she was actually in a relationship with the Archduke. The man understood everything, but then he remembered the rumours that were going around about the Archduke's wedding. But not only Glenn was planning a wedding, but Vivian, according to the butler, wanted to get married this year. But the girl noted that these were her thoughts out loud. The butler hustled and sent her portraits to suitors, and one wealthy man took a liking to her. The Archduke's reaction to this news surprised everyone, as he broke the doorknob out of jealousy and anger. He said the object was too fragile. But the girl and the servant knew that it was made of gilded steel and screwed into the door. They wondered how he had managed to do such a thing, but then they remembered that he was a master swordsman. Lady Lucian was beginning to worry about their contract, so she asked the man if it was true that they would be ending their relationship after a year. He said he wasn't sure about that. He apologized to Vivian and said that breaking up was not in his plans, nor was platonic love. Suddenly Vivian realized that he might one day say there was no contract at all, so she decided to convince him to make their meetings the same. A desperate situation called for desperate measures. It was time for the sweetest face in the world. Vivian asked the Archduke if they were a couple. Glenn laughed. The girl thought he was playing with her feelings. The man took her hand and asked her who she was. She got embarrassed and said she was probably a girl. He smiled and said, "Let's start this way." Vivian misunderstood him as usual, and thought he would treat her either as a girlfriend or a kidnapper. She wanted him to remember her as his girlfriend, though, so she thanked him. Glenn couldn't stand it and laughed. Meanwhile, there was a butler in the room who understood nothing of the situation. Meanwhile, the Archduke's knights were making noise under the windows, so he suggested that Vivian go outside to quiet them. The girl realized that the Archduke's men and the guards of her house would fight, so she grabbed the young man's arm and pulled him towards the exit. As they descended the stairs, the man told Lady Lewis that she was more than a girl to him, so they went outside together and stood in front of the knights. But besides the knights, the girl's parents and her half-brother were waiting for them downstairs, and they didn't look happy about it. Things were getting worse by the minute. She was being accused of treason for seducing the Archduke, so he took her by the hand and told her they had to tell the truth. He picked up the girl in his arms and said that now no one would think that she had kidnapped him. Glenn carried her gently in his arms to his knights, who were very much surprised. Glenn's bodyguards wondered who this girl was and assumed she had kidnapped their master with black magic. Vivian was outraged as she knew that only a few people in the Empire could use black sorcery. The rest would be executed, so she said she was not versed in it. She said she didn't even have the time or energy for fencing, let alone black magic. Vivian's servants told the Archduke's guards that their mistress had long ago abandoned sorcery, as she considered it very difficult, and she did not practice swordsmanship because she could get blisters. And though she was very sweet, but her talents God had left her to his lord. But the guard would not stop, for he had a witness who claimed that she had kidnapped the Archduke. Just as the knights were about to bare their blades, Glenn intervened. He said Vivian Lewis was his girlfriend. As the young man was about to carry the girl into the house, her father interrogated him if he had heard him correctly that his daughter was his girlfriend. Glenn replied that he loved Vivian. At that moment, Lord Royd bared his sword and Glenn asked him if he was sick of living. The knight almost cried, but he was sure that this witch had cast a spell. The protagonist asked the subordinate if he was willing to be held accountable for his words. The man didn't understand why Lord Royd didn't value his life. The knight fell to his knees and dropped his sword, and the Archduke told him that he would devise his punishment at home. This behaviour of the man made everyone realise that this was no joke. But what surprised everyone was that he liked girls like Vivian. The Archduke's knights had a question as to what would now happen to Princess Eunice. Princess Eunice was the first heir to the throne of the southern country of Evron. She and the Archduke had a successful alliance, but now he had a problem to solve. Vivian thought about it. It was just as she had assumed. The man noticed the change in her mood. Glenn sighed and said that the title was weighing him down a lot, since instead of an explanation, he wished he was in the same bed as Vivian. And afterwards Mr. Lennox laughed, which surprised his knights. The knights were sure that they would have nightmares, as it seemed to them that the devil himself had left hell and was laughing at them. Meanwhile, the head of the knights apologized to His Highness for breaking into the Count's house. Glenn smiled at the girl, offering to settle the matter with her family. Vivian was worried that it was freezing outside, and the Archduke could freeze in just a shirt. The girl was a little cold, so the man held her tightly against him, throwing her family into shock. After looking at all this, the father of the family suggested that the Archduke come into the house and discuss the situation. They went into the house and sat by the fireplace. The Count asked the young man how long he was going to keep silent. Except that the Archduke was silent. He was holding the Count's daughter in his arms the entire time. Glenn replied that he didn't want to part with the girl for a minute. This made the girl a little tense, and she asked him to tone it down. After all, they only had a love contract. Vivian shivered a little as she thought he was marrying Princess Eunice, and yes, he looked like he was teasing her. Nevertheless, His Highness invited the Count to continue the conversation. The girl noticed that the man addressed her father using his title. Her mother, on the other hand, offered the Archduke a warm cup of tea. At this point, the Count noticed that Glenn was wearing his favourite shirt. To this, the young man stated that he just didn't have anything to wear. The Archduke said he would order the piece to be thoroughly washed and afterward return it along with the other 100 pieces. The girl's father said it wasn't that important. He was just a little uncomfortable right now. Vivian, on the other hand, noticed that His Highness looked very enchanting, even when he was drinking tea. So, the head of the family asked Glenn if he was in a serious relationship with his daughter. The young man confirmed this, and said that although it had only been a week, he was sure of his feelings. Things were going too smoothly, so Cassian jumped into the conversation. He asked what the man liked about his sister. Vivian realised it was said sarcastically, so she thought about how that was no way to talk about her sister to her brother. The Archduke thought for a moment, and then said that Vivian was very nice. The man also said he likes her round eyes and the way she blushes funny when she gets embarrassed, and afterward asked the guy if he didn't think his sister was adorable. Cassian did not share the Archduke's views, but after being pinched by his mother, said he was so enchanted by his sister that he was about to lose his mind. The conversation with his parents was over. Glenn was going home, and told Vivian that he would send her a letter and a gift in the morning, because that was the foundation of the relationship. It was her first relationship, so she wanted to ask Marina for advice, but she hadn't gotten home yet. Glenn had kissed the girl goodbye, and now she was sitting in her room, angry and punching a roster pillow with a picture of a man on it. Only now it was beginning to dawn on the girl that it was unlikely that an imperial investigator would have been able to come, as not much time had passed since the kidnapping. Meanwhile, at the Archduke's estate, the knights were beating Lord Royd, for they believed that if they did so, their lord would forgive him. The protagonist himself was drinking wine and choosing flowers for Vivian, that would harmonise perfectly with her hair. Glenn knew the Earl's daughter liked poetry and novels, but he didn't know if a book was a good gift or not. The young man could not decide on jewellery either, as the joy of such things would quickly pass. Then he decided that he would give the girl shoes, a dress, and a brooch. The butler said that there was a belief that if you gave shoes to a girl, she would run away from a man. But the Archduke was 100% sure that Vivian would do no such thing, for she liked him too much. The butler took the boxes and left the gentleman. He thought the man had matured as he thanked him for his service. When the man was alone in the room, he pulled out a key and opened a hiding place in the desk. He pulled out a notebook with one of Vivian's fanfics written in it. He thought it was the sort of thing one would choose a pseudonym for, but it wasn't about her. The young man wondered if the day would come when he could read this masterpiece to the girl. The man admitted that he had waited a very long time for all this, as before meeting Vivian he doubted that he had a heart. He first heard of her when two ladies were gossiping in the garden and bragging about the books in Vivi Rabbit's collection. Then he picked up and read one of the books that had fallen to the ground. He even read one of the passages aloud and realised it was all about him. He didn't realise if there was anyone who could introduce him in such a way, as he didn't have a sea of free time for such talk. So at one of his sword-fighting training sessions, he asked Lord Royd how he saw him. The knight immediately said that his master was the strongest swordsman, but about his personal qualities, he didn't know how to answer. Glenn realised that even Royd hadn't said anything like that, but an unknown author had written a lot of text about him. The secretary, meanwhile, was reading the Archduke his schedule for the near future, but the young man didn't listen to the employee and pondered how to find and what to do with Vivi Rabbit. Be that as it may, he went to the reception, but continued his reflections, which led him to the idea that the author of those stories belonged to high society and from an aristocratic family. That's when he noticed Vivian at the reception, who once again said hello to him and ran off. At that evening, the man realised that the author of the text was from a noble family, and the gaze he felt all the time on him most likely belonged to her. Not knowing who was following him was stressing the Archduke out, so he decided to investigate the matter on his own. So, he found out that the author was using one bookstore as a middleman, and although there was a print store there, it didn't look like a quality book could be made there. He watched the assortment and was disappointed, but tried to hope to meet Vivi Rabbit here. Just then, Vivian walked past him and brought new manuscripts to print. The girl approached the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper was very happy to see her, as many people were asking when there would be a new job from Vivi Rabbit. The girl had just brought in a new novel, asking for it to be printed and bound. Glenn, on the other hand, noticed that the stranger had well-groomed hair and a nice manicure. Her dress, too, though simple in appearance, was classic and quite stylish. There's no doubt about it, she's an aristocrat. It surprised him that this girl was walking unaccompanied. He realised that she was not afraid of anything, not even the possibility of being attacked. Glenn himself was being sold a rabbit toy by one of the vendors, and the young man realised that he had seen this girl somewhere before. He bought a keychain and remembered it was Vivian Lewis. The Archduke realised that she was the one who had written novels about him, yet had chosen such an obvious pseudonym. The day of the reception had arrived. The young man thought about the fact that most likely the girl would fall again several times, and her older brother would catch her. The Archduke watched her and thought it was the shoes, but she was falling even with her boots on. The man understood this girl less and less, and her companion thought she had said something wrong, so he had to apologise to her for the misunderstanding. His Highness drank wine and realised that Lady LBC's downfall did not concern him in any way, though the romance of their relationship was sweet. True, he was a little surprised by the fact that in terms of the plot, the relationships of the characters were similar to those of kindergartners. At this point, the Marquise Maurice approached him and they began to make small talk. This conversation was making him a little tense, since they had seen each other a few days ago, and he had no desire to talk to her now. Meanwhile, he watched Vivian, who was putting food on her plate and smiling. The young man could not understand why the girl was gathering food. He thought she had been starved at home, but then he remembered that there were no such rumours about her father. While the young man was watching the girl, he fell out of conversation with the Marquise, who offered him a dance with her daughter. But Glenn did not want to dance, so he apologised to the Marquise and her daughter and left in an unknown direction. The man wasn't just running away, he was chasing Vivian. The chase for the girl led him to the Imperial Forest, where outsiders were not allowed to go without permission. The Archduke decided to follow her further, as he knew there were many wild animals in the forest. At that moment, he noticed that the girl had brought food and started feeding the rabbit. But there was a whole family of rabbits that flanked the girl and climbed into her arms. The Archduke was mortified, but behind him the first patrolman of this forest appeared. He reacted instantly and hid the girl, pulling her close to him, and the guards didn't notice anyone. Afterwards, the man looked at the girl and asked her if she realized that she had infiltrated the emperor's lands. At that moment, for the first time in his life, he saw a man with eyes full of true love looking back at him. Then he realized that the time had come. Then he added that it was time for them to head back to the ballroom. Glenn helped the girl up the steps and she asked him if he remembered her. He smiled and said she was the one who said hello to him and ran right away. Vivian blushed as the Archduke added that she was nice. She wished him a good evening and was about to run away. His Highness realized that she was still a child now, but in 5 years she would be 21, so he silently watched her grow up from afar. Time passed, and the Archduke asked his secretary if Count Louis was holding any official reception, but the latter had heard of no such thing. Glenn had thought for the past 5 years only of the Earl's daughter and missed her. That very day, he was sitting in the park looking up at the stars, when he saw Vivian's silhouette in a nightgown in the bushes. Her outfit wasn't suitable for walking, so he threw his jacket over her and thought about how she'd gotten past security. There was a system in his house where the guards informed the butler about the guest, and the butler informed him about the girl, but no one informed him about the girl. The young man immediately realized that a black magic spell had been cast on Vivian, but the problem was that she didn't know how to conjure, which meant that someone else had caused the girl's behavior. The Archduke realized that Vivian was under a charm curse, meaning it was a magic that allowed him to summon an evil spirit and attack a chosen target, and it was Crown Prince Arthur Asmode who did it. This man was openly afraid to challenge him, so he always attacked from under the covers, and this time even his favorite used. The next second the girl hugged the man and said she liked him a lot. She cried and said she didn't want to get married. The man hugged the girl. He knew that enough families wanted to be related to her father, and he was going to deal with all of them a little later. Vivian confessed that she wanted to love the Archduke for the rest of her life, and he suggested that they leave things as they are now. But Lady Louis was indignant and said she should marry too, as she couldn't live her whole life watching him from afar. The Archduke realized that the girl was under the influence of a curse, but as soon as he took a closer look, he realized that she was so harmless that the darkness had not taken possession of her heart. And she was hammering him with her fists and crying, saying that he annoyed her a lot. Vivian confessed that she wished she could be the one to gaze upon his beauty, and then he offered to kidnap herself. Since he gave his permission to do so, the girl took out a rope from her pocket and asked permission to tie him up. She happily tied his hands and led the way. The young man asked how she was going to kidnap him, since she even had the alias Vivi Rabbit, to which she replied that she was not a rabbit. Glenn asked her why she fed the rabbits when she came to the imperial palace, and why she didn't have them at home. She replied that her mother didn't like them, and they liked to play outside. They came to the end of the park, and there was a carriage, but there were no guards, though there should have been. Then he noticed 2 guards to the side sleeping sweetly. Glenn, on the other hand, couldn't understand what had happened to his knights. The girl admitted that she had given them candy before they fell asleep. The man doubted they would voluntarily eat the stuff, but nonetheless took the candy from the girl's hands to gobble it down. Lady Louis already had a coachman waiting. She pushed the Archduke in front of her into the carriage and told him that he had agreed to stay with them. As the Archduke sat in the carriage, guards came running. He told them it was a kidnapping, but he would be home soon. The knights wanted to follow their lord, but the latter said that if they followed him, he would kill them. Vivian brought him into her home and told him he was now hers. The man agreed to it. The girl led him to her room, which looked like an altar of adoration to his name. Glenn blushed, for there were not only portraits, but also a pillow with his full-length face on it, which the girl slept with every night. The Archduke at this moment broke the rope and fell the girl on the bed, pinning her to him. The man kissed the top of her head and said he didn't know what he would do to her if things continued like this. Vivian misunderstood his words, so she quickly tied his hands again and told him there was nothing he could do this way. She was happy and said she wanted to paint the Archduke as he was very handsome now. Next, she ripped off the top of his clothes to make it look like a scene from a novel she'd picked up from Marina. The man was concerned about what kind of books Vivian was reading, and she was thinking about the shades of paint for the portrait, and he was already offering to touch himself to her. which she did, noting that he had a very firm torso. The girl realized that the young man had very pumped-up muscles, and this had to be taken into account during the drawing. Then she climbed right on top of him to examine his facial features. The man swallowed. The girl tried to kiss the Archduke, but only hit his forehead, and he noticed that it was far from a kiss. Vivian didn't understand how this was supposed to happen, so the Archduke advised her to be gentle and even bite him a little. The girl didn't want to bite him, as she realized it would hurt him, but he was sure her semblance of a kiss would hurt a lot more. But since he insisted, she obeyed and did as he said. The man complimented her, which drove her into a blush. Glenn offered her to marry him, which greatly disturbed the girl, as she realized that this union was impossible. Vivian said her father wouldn't agree to it. His Highness wanted her to wake up, because he wanted to see the real her, not the image conjured up by magic. Lady Lewis went on and said that although he holds a very high place in society, and by marrying him one can live happily, there is a downside to this. But that was her father's opinion. So Glenn asked her if she could live happily if she married another man. And then she cried, calling him a fool. And he noticed that she called him by his name, which made her angry, and she started to lightly hit him. The man took it as a massage and smiled. He felt like he was being slapped by a rabbit with its soft paw, so it didn't hurt at all. And then he confessed his love, but the girl interjected, as she did not believe that such a thing could happen. The Archduke repeated his confession several times, and Vivian began to repeat that it couldn't be, and even twitched. Such behavior and reaction spoke of the spell breaking and the girl coming to her senses. She lost consciousness for a moment and fell on the man's chest. The young man exhaled in relief. He was glad that the magic was over, but was worried about the girl falling off the bed from the surprise. When he returned home after all these events, he reflected on the love contract they had made. This contract was kindergarten for the man, but it was at least a relationship, and actually he wasn't going to end the relationship after a year. The knights who accompanied him home shook with fear as their master smiled. It made them feel creepy. Meanwhile, Vivian was happy as the Archduke kissed her goodnight. The morning came. The girl was having breakfast, and the maid remarked that her mistress had gone to bed late last night. This girl obviously wanted to know the details of what happened last night, but Vivian only wiped her mouth and remained silent. Vivian remembered her half-brother's words and felt sick to her stomach as the maid held her down. But then the maid began questioning Lady Lewis about whether she had really been seeing the Archduke since last week. The maid also asked the girl if she had been in a relationship before His Highness. She replied that she had not, and did not understand what her maid meant by relationship. The maid clarified that she was talking about a sexual relationship. Vivian was outraged and said they had no such thing. Emma, however, was very much worried about her mistress, for she liked the Archduke too much, and asked her mistress not to trust him blindly, no matter how handsome he was. Meanwhile, at the academy, Marina had picked up some books from the library and was about to sit down to study when she noticed her bag was open. The girl examined the item and realized that nothing had been stolen. Then what had just happened? The Archduke, however, kept his promise and sent Vivian a letter, flowers that matched her hair, and several other gifts. The girl was glad that Glenn had personally written her the letter, for it smelled like him, and his handwriting was very beautiful. Vivian felt like she was about to melt with joy and happiness. In the letter, the man asked her how she had slept, and also said he missed her a lot, so he would come over for dinner in the evening. When she reached the end, she realized that they were going to have a date tonight. Vivian rushed over to hug Emma as she was overwhelmed by the feelings of having a date with the man she loved. So that the girl would not hurt herself, the maid made her open the Archduke's gifts, and there was a marvellous dress studded with precious stones. Vivian marvelled at the fact that this dress was made of fine lace that could rightly be called a work of art. That was all marvellous, but how did the man know the size of the girl's clothes? The next box contained gemstone jewellery. At that moment, a butler knocked on the door and said that her father was expecting the girl at his place. The girl did not keep her father waiting, so she went straight to his office, and there she saw that there was another man in his office. The man was Baron Evan Harris. The girl realised that she had heard of him somewhere before. The girl remembered that he was Mrs. Rockbell's cousin. Vivian did not understand what had brought the man to them today. Had something happened to his aunt? And he had brought a large number of suitcases with him. So it turned out that the suitcases contained her clothes, and Baron Harris would be accompanying her on the vacation she was going on right today. The daughter tried to object to her father, for she realised that if she left now, their relationship with the Archduke would have to be temporarily terminated. But the man cut her off at the half word. Suddenly, Earl Louis asked his daughter if she knew where the bead she had accidentally broken came from. The girl was frightened, for she did not understand how he knew about the accident. And then Marina came into the room. The Count ordered the girl to sit down, and Vivian noticed that she looked very guilty. Marina said that until the moment the bag with the object fell into the hands of her friend, she went to the academy with it, and there is a strange Professor Shannon works there. Not too long ago, Marina had already told Vivian about the Crown Prince, who was searching all over the Empire for talented mages in various fields and luring them to him. This Yanban had knowledge of black magic and also had imperial permission to use it, and that bead was his work. Vivian admitted that as soon as she opened Marina's bag, the bead immediately exploded. The professor had thought it out well, as the person who would pick up the bead would be the one subjected to black magic. Vivian suddenly realized that the curse was meant for Marina, not her. Marina confessed that this sorcerer had offered her to study black magic, but she had refused, so perhaps it was his revenge on her. The man always got rid of those who went against him, as well as following the prince's orders without question. But this time it was Vivian who had gotten it wrong. But the crux of the problem was that the Crown Prince was behind it all. Vivian, on the other hand, knew that the relationship between the prince and the Archduke was worse than ever, so she decided to ask the reason for it if possible. The Count was aware that the Archduke had sympathy for his daughter, but he did not want to go along with her and reverse his decision. Suddenly the girl realized that her father was afraid of Glenn. She herself knew that he was notorious and was considered the most dangerous man in the Empire. He was called a genius, the youngest swordmaster, a mad and cruel man. Her father assumed the man wanted to find out what Vivian's relationship was with the Crown Prince, but she couldn't believe it was all an act. Even so, she wasn't going to leave without saying goodbye to Glenn. Vivian's father was worried, as he realized that she had gotten into a very dangerous game, and she needed to leave before things got worse. Nevertheless, the girl insisted on bidding the Archduke farewell before leaving. The Count allowed her to write a farewell letter to the Archduke. She apologized for not being able to meet with him, and her family is sending her out of town for the time being until the situation is cleared up and they realize Glenn had nothing to do with it. Her mother and Emma saw the girl off, the maid weeping and begging her mistress's forgiveness for not telling her of her father's intentions. Surprisingly, even Cassian came running to see Vivian off. Vivian thought her brother had lost his mind as tears came to his eyes. The young man wiped his eyes and asked her to accept the amulet he had brought. His sister thanked him for it. Louis, the eldest son of the family, was worried about this situation happening because they had lost their influence in the Empire. Vivian was angry at her brother for speaking so disrespectfully in front of their father. The boy dreamed of restoring their family to its former glory and making sure that no one could ever lay a finger on them again. The situation was getting worse, but his brother wanted to make sure no one could hurt his sister. The girl did not understand his such a violent reaction, and the guy in embarrassment had already turned around and went into the house. Meanwhile, Vivian was already in the carriage, thinking about what to do with the vow she had made to the Archduke. The only thing she wished for was the happiness and peace of mind of her beloved, and her farewell letter had already been delivered to His Highness's house. The man snatched the envelope and started reading. He thought she couldn't wait to see him, so she sent a nice letter. But as soon as he reached the end, his expression changed dramatically, and he crumpled the piece of paper. And then he snapped out of his seat, putting on his jacket. The butler tried to stop him, but saw him smile and stopped. Vivian's problem started from the very beginning of her journey. It started raining heavily, and they had to stop and pitch a tent under a tree to avoid getting sick. The girl and Emma were already sitting in the tent, but even by the fire it was very cold. The Baron pulled out the disposable magic item her father had given him. She realized, however, that it was an expense for her family, as it was hard to call them rich. Vivian almost cried as she wanted her family to be okay. The rain had stopped. Emma and the other servants began to prepare dinner, and the girl wondered if she could help them. She realized that even Baron Hens knew how to cook, and she had no such skills. Tea was poured for the girl. She wondered whether the Archduke had received her letter and how he had reacted. And on the whole, she hoped that she would have a chance to explain it to him. Vivian drank the tea with pleasure, and then the knight took off his helmet and said he was glad she liked the drink. In him, she recognized the man from the hunting competition. The knight was surprised, as 7 years had passed since then, and the girl still remembered him. The girl remembered that she used to make jewelry like other aristocrats to give to her loved ones. But the pieces were not beautiful enough, so she never gave them to anyone. And then this knight supported her, saying that since her jewelry had no owner, she could give it to him. The food was ready, and there were many different dishes that were so delicious that she gobbled them up in both cheeks. They only had half a day to stay on the road, so they decided to spend the night in a hotel. Vivian had a lot of fun travelling with Emma. The maid reciprocated. The morning came. The girl went downstairs and was drinking tea when suddenly her uncle, who was also passing through, came up to her. He wanted to introduce the girl to someone right there. It was a young man, Viscount Alvin. The man was glad to meet the girl and said that she was much prettier than they say about her. The uncle seated the girl at the same table as the Viscount. It was like a viewing. Vivian realised that her father would never have allowed such a situation. It was most likely her uncle's initiative. The man across the hall was named Scott Alvin. Vivian realised that this was not the most decent man, since he had decided to hold a viewing party at an inn like this one. He thought the girl was embarrassed, but she just didn't like him. The Vicomte talked too much and all out of order. Vivian got the impression that he was not a friend of her head, since he chose to call her by her first name when they first met. He winked at her and said she could call him Scott. The man boasted that a mine had been found on his estate, and now he was rich. Vivian knew her family had lost its former wealth, but the meeting her uncle had arranged was beyond her comprehension. The girl glared at her uncle. She had known him since he had squandered his entire fortune gambling. Viscount Alvin kept advertising himself. He said it would be profitable for a girl to marry him, and then she would wear the most fashionable dresses. He said many more different nasty things toward the Lewis family, so she jumped up and said she didn't want to hear it all any further. After that, she splashed water in his face. She said that although their family was not rich, it was beneath their dignity to ask a man like him for money. Vivian was sure her uncle had lost big time, so he decided to sell her to a worthless man like Alvin. At that moment, Scott swung around to hit her, but there was no blow, as the Archduke sealed him to the wall. Glenn had his knights running towards him and shouting that at this rate, he would kill the man. A crowd had already gathered, among which His Highness saw his beloved and released the impudent man. Vivian ran up to the men. She was glad the Archduke hadn't killed him. Glenn smiled at Vivian and said that he was about to steal her away. He stared into her eyes with his crazy eyes and asked her if she wanted him to steal her. She smiled and said she agreed. The Archduke put his arm around her shoulders and told her to have the knights take care of the Viscount. Glenn picked Vivian up in his arms, smacked her forehead, and carried her to an unknown destination. A short time later, Vivian woke up in a completely unfamiliar place. Meanwhile, Glenn walked into the room wearing only his robe after his shower. He bent over the girl and asked how she was feeling, for after he had used displacement magic, she had passed out. The girl was surprised, but remembered that in Marina's notes, she had read that after the first use of magic on a person, that person could lose consciousness for 6 hours. Lady Lewis had just realised that the Archduke had kidnapped her in front of everyone. His Highness hugged the girl tightly and asked if she was dizzy. She said she was and asked to move away, but he didn't listen to her. Instead, he plopped her on the bed and pressed her against his chest. She could hear his heart beating abnormally fast. Vivian was upset because she had broken her word to her father and her contract with the Archduke. Lady Lewis realised that he had received her letter, but instead of a fit of anger, he hugged her and told her that she wouldn't run away from him so easily. She said she had no choice. He took it personally and said she just didn't believe him. He pulled away and reminded her that she was the one who had offered him a love contract. And all because she was sure that a serious relationship between them could not be. The man didn't realise who had told her that. She reminded him that everyone felt that way. Then he asked if she was the one who said she loved him. He leaned over her again and asked if that was what she had written in her letter. He quoted lines from her letter. Vivian repeated what she had written with confidence and said that she liked the Archduke so much she followed him even under the influence of magic. In the letter, she also asked the man to end their contractual relationship. Vivian burst into tears, saying that she liked the Archduke very much and wished him happiness. The man interrupted her and asked why he had kidnapped her. She suggested that he had done it to gather evidence. She said she had written about everything she knew in the letter and would say nothing more even under torture. The man agreed that the best way to gather information was torture, so he began to tickle the girl frantically. They found out during this operation that Vivian had been in love with the Archduke for 7 years, so they cuddled and swayed around the bed. The young man hugged and kissed the girl, saying that every time he sees her so sweet and tender, He feels like he's going crazy. He asked her what he had to do to make her believe him, and then asked permission to kiss her. At that moment, the door to the Archduke's room was opened with a foot by an enraged girl. She hit Glenn hard and he flew back against the wall. She yelled at him and asked him what he was going to do with this cutest child. The woman's name was Isabel Elphidian Glenn. She was his mother and a noble princess of the Elphidar Empire. She told her son he looked like a pervert, looked at the girl and noted her beauty. Isabel hugged the girl and told her that she had nothing to fear, and concluded for herself what type of girl her son liked. And so, the noble princess was startled when Lennox appeared with Vivian in his arms, as she couldn't contact him before. The young man admitted that it was his beloved, and his mother asked him what he meant by the word. He said that there could be only one meaning. Isabel was now scolding her son for disrespecting her, and for wanting to torture this sweet child. After that, the woman took the girl to her place, dressed her up in a beautiful dress and braided her hair. Afterward they went to eat, the table bursting with an abundance of dishes. Isabel offered the girl a taste of mushroom soup. Vivian looked at her with admiration. The Archduchess began to hug Lady Lewis, which infuriated Glenn, and he asked her to sit back down and not interfere with Vivian's eating. Vivian had noticed that Isabel and Glenn were more like friends, plus she had heard that she had a sea of suitors before her marriage to the Archduke, but she had chosen Lennox's father, who was no match for her. Vivian knew they had to tell Isabel about the contract, but the Archduke said they were getting married. Lady Lewis was taken aback. She didn't understand what the Archduke was up to. Isabella, on the other hand, supported her son's idea, for after all they had already done, it was the logical solution to the problem. Glenn grimaced and asked his mother not to say things like that, since he hadn't done any of the things she was thinking. The Archduchess hesitated and asked her son how far they had come. He sipped his tea, blushed and said that he was close to becoming a monk. The woman smiled slyly as she didn't quite believe what her son was telling her, but he confirmed his words and said he wouldn't say it again. Then she looked at Lady Lewis. It seemed to her that the girl was very much frightened by their altercation. Isabella confessed that she now understood why he liked Vivian so much, and the Archduke did not hesitate to pick up the girl and say that she was his. His mother promised that she would not take her away from him, and he himself understood this, for he knew that his mother just wanted to look at his beloved. The Archduchess took her seat, and Lennox took his, placing Vivian on his lap. The girl was stunned as she realized where she was and who was sitting in front of her, and her lover was doing such a thing. Afterward, he kissed her and told her that if she kept being this nice, he wouldn't stop embarrassing her. Vivian mentally asked the Archduchess for help, but she wanted to hug her, as did Lennox. But what interested Isabella was whether the girl's father knew she was in their house. The man confessed that he had left a message for the Count 4 hours ago, whereupon his mother concluded that he had simply taken the girl and kidnapped her, and the latter, out of fear, could not even object. But Vivian refuted that thought, as she had agreed to go with the Duke not because he threatened her, but because she liked him so much. The Archduchess was pleased that it was not essentially a kidnapping, and even more so that the girl liked her son. Vivian admitted that she fell in love with His Highness at first sight, because he was, and is, a very attractive man. She had generally liked him since she was 14, and back then it was enough for her to watch him from afar, so it was okay if they didn't get married. This was the turning point in the conversation. Isabella looked at her son and asked him if he had proposed to Vivian, because everything that was happening now was very strange. The Archduke swallowed and said what else he would do. At that second, his mother was at his side and pushed him away from Vivian. She proceeded to bash him and talk about how he should have started with a proposal and engagement, and this way he misled the girl. The young man claimed that he was just talking to Vivian about it when the mother interrupted him, to which the woman said that he was not solving the problem, but aggravating it by kissing, hugging and biting the girl. The Archduchess told her son that he would have to discuss everything with the Count a little later, but for now he needed to talk to Vivian. She then wished them a good conversation and left the room. When they were alone, the Archduke said that he was serious from the beginning and wanted to marry her and no one else, and afterward kissed her. It didn't take long for a reaction, and Vivian pushed him away. But the Archduke only smiled and asked the girl to do so again, because her blows did not bring him pain at all. His Highness claimed that once they were married, he would hug and kiss her even more and more. Afterward, he got down on one knee and said he wanted to share his life with her, because she was the only one he would put a ring on his finger for. He realized he'd liked her for 7 years, but he'd been fond of her for a long time too. Vivian could not believe that for 5 whole years the Archduke had been in love with her. She could only dream of such a thing. She was afraid that it was all a dream, and that if she woke up, which she would not, she would die. The young man stood on one knee and waited for an answer. Lennox admitted that if he waited any longer, he would go crazy, so he insisted on the wedding taking place in a week's time. It was a surprise, and Vivian asked the young man to slow down, as it was necessary to start with the engagement, for everyone did that, not the other way around. Lennox thought about it. He realized that if there was a wedding but no engagement, it would be food for rumors for their society. Vivian, on the other hand, couldn't believe that her lover was so angry right now, as he wanted to kill anyone and everyone who looked askew at them. She, on the other hand, couldn't still believe he had liked her for so long. He admitted that she was too young then, so he didn't want to get close to her at the time, which was why he had waited all these years for her to grow up. Talk was now superfluous, and the Archduke kissed the girl's hand. But she pulled her hand out and asked him not to do such things so suddenly, while he smiled and said that he had done nothing of the sort, except to make her believe his words. Now the young man was curious as to until when she would call him by his title, rather than by his name or a cute nickname. She couldn't make up her mind to do so, and the young man had already called her Vivi, then made it clear that he knew about the novel that Rabbit Vivi had written. Then he asked me to call his name. As soon as she did, he stroked her head. But that wasn't enough for him, and he asked now for his nickname. The girl was embarrassed, but he said there was nothing wrong with it, so she didn't need to be embarrassed. Vivian said nothing, and Lennox added that he was willing to wait a little longer, and then he would eat her up completely and utterly. Meanwhile, on the veranda, Isabella was drinking tea with her husband Lucas. She did not understand how they got such a child as Lennox, because the father and son were very similar in appearance, but their characters were different. Lucas also wondered what the girl was able to bewitch his son like that. The husband and wife realized that their child had a strong character and could do everything on his own and achieve a lot on his own while not making mistakes, so they were envied by other parents. But he had a disadvantage. He was not interested in people. He did not make friends or acquaintances. He was so cold that the air around him became frosty. He was ruthless in battle. His combat power was terrifying as it was hard to measure, so they were worried about whether he could find a mate. And it would have been all right, for Lennox had found a mate, the small and immature Vivian. Isabella confirmed that the girl was in love with their son, but she feared the day would come when she would hate him, so she told her husband that they had an obligation to keep her at all costs. Isabella was now trying her best to placate Vivian. Delicious desserts came into play. The woman said that if the girl wanted to try something, she should tell her, and she would give it to the cook. Her husband, Lucas, also kept up with his wife. He talked about how the girl needs to eat well since she's already very skinny. Lennox's parents tried in every possible way to win her favour, but the Archduke himself sat silently, crossing his arms on his chest. The young man was angry, for he was sitting by himself alone in the chair, and his mother had seated his sweetheart between herself and his father. Isabella claimed she was saving the girl from him that way. Then Lennox asked his father to say something, but realized he was unequivocally on his wife's side. The Archduke's mother asked her son if he had anything to say to them, and then added that Vivian shouldn't be so embarrassed and afraid. The young man cleared his throat and informed his parents that he and Vivian would be engaged in a week. It was a bit of a surprise, as they thought the couple would be dating, and here they were getting engaged right away. But Isabella was not confused, and asked about whether her son had prepared the ring, and how the ceremony itself would be conducted. Lennox said the ring would be ready in 3 days, and to start, he invited the Lewis family over for a chat. Isabella couldn't believe that the ring could be made in 3 days, but her son surprised her here too. He said that he started preparing for this day 6 months ago. It sounded strange, so the mother asked her son how long he had liked Vivian. He replied that he had liked her for 5 years. The mother couldn't believe her ears, as usually people show at least some indication that they like the other person. But her son could hardly be called an ordinary person. At this point, Vivian raised her voice and said that she could eat no more, and the Archduchess realized that she had overdone it a bit. Lennox handed her a napkin and told her that she didn't have to eat everything his parents gave her, and smiled while doing so. And his dad and mum were shocked, as they didn't know their son was capable of such a smile. The young man rose and said he would escort the girl to her room, to which Isabella replied that she had seen perfectly well what they were doing behind closed doors. The Archduke looked at his mother and said that he would not cross the line to marriage, and tonight he planned to just bathe the girl and put her to bed. Isabella was furious. She couldn't believe she had raised such a shameless man. So Vivian was already in the bathing room, which surprised her with its size, and was about to undress and lower herself into the tub. But the Archduke suddenly entered the room, and the girl did not know what to do in such a situation, and he pretended to knock next time. Now they were sitting side by side on the side of the tub, and the man was wondering what the temperature of the water was and how Vivian was feeling in general, for she was very tired today. And afterward they came to the girl's room, and Lennox suggested that she go to bed together, holding hands. And then he pointed to the novel she had written, which provoked an overreaction. Vivian wanted to fall through the ground now, because he was quoting lines from it. The best part was that he had memorized the whole novel by heart, so he could quote it endlessly, even though Vivian asked him to stop. He promised to stop if she called his cute nickname. To end this torture, she called his nickname and received praise. Now they were lying in bed, and he was asking how he could make it up to her, and even offered to sing her a bedtime song. And so they fell asleep. The morning came, and the Archduke carried Vivian to the bathroom, though she protested, saying that he had promised not to touch her until the wedding. The man claimed to know her secret wish for him to give her a good scrubbing. She screamed and begged the Archduchess to save her. Meanwhile, at Earl Lewis's house, during the night, they read a letter the Archduke had sent them, saying that his family had taken Vivian under their protection. So Cassian was mad with anger at the man for kidnapping his sister. Their mother asked her son to calm down, as the letter said the girl was fine. The woman realized that Cassian was always very worried and concerned about his sister, but she never noticed any of this. The mother wanted to tell her son not to worry so much, because the older members of the family didn't care about gossip and rumors about the difference in social statuses. Meanwhile, in the Archduke's house, he led the girl to a dressing room where there were many outfits for her. It turned out that the girl had completely forgotten about meeting her parents. So now the first thing they were doing was picking out a dress for her, one of many she liked. The maids, as soon as they saw this, led her behind her to try on the outfit. Vivian looked gorgeous in her new dress, and the Archduke ordered the servants to bring in a red diamond to use as jewellery. It was not a stone, but a beautiful red diamond necklace. Lennox had told the maid that he would put it on Vivian himself. Vivian was very surprised. She asked if she could wear the thing as it was much more expensive than herself. Lennox replied that she was much prettier than the jewellery, and then added that it suited her very well, and went to get dressed for her parents' reception as well. The girl was so dressed up that she felt like a princess. After a while, the Archduke got dressed as well. The suit suited him incredibly well, and they were ready to go downstairs. Vivian was dazzled by his beauty, but he let her look at him as long as she wanted. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and a report that the guests would be arriving soon. Vivian thought she wouldn't see her parents until the afternoon, but they were very worried about her, so they decided to arrive early in the morning. The girl was surprised when the Archduke decided to call her parents father-in-law and mother-in-law. The young man's parents came down to the living room too, and his mother scolded him again for only worrying about his comfort and not paying attention to Vivian. It was partly true, and it seemed to the young man that the girl was beginning to hate him, but it wasn't true. She just didn't like him hugging her like that in a situation like this. Isabella watched the couple and concluded that only this girl could manage their son, so she was bound to become their daughter-in-law. The Lewis family arrived at Glen Manor, but Marina followed them, which annoyed Cassian. The butler announced the arrival of the guests. Lord Lucas asked them to be brought to him. As soon as the doors opened, Vivian ran to hug her parents, and Cassian couldn't help himself and lunged at Lennox with his fists, accusing him of making his sister cry. But the Archduke began to defend Vivian, saying that she liked him very much, and all that had happened was a misunderstanding. But the girl's brother was not satisfied. He did not understand why she was going to marry him, because he would take advantage of her trust and leave her for nothing. Now this really pissed Lennox off. He looked angrily at the young man and asked him why it was he who should take advantage of Vivian and then leave her. The Archduke then approached Vivian and told the young Earl of Lewis that he intended to marry his younger sister, and he did not intend to change his mind. As much as Cassian didn't like the idea, he realized that under this man's protection, no one would touch his sister. So he asked him to swear that it was not a joke and he would marry her. When the situation was cleared up, the butler escorted them all to a room where his mother asked Castan to behave himself. The Archduke sat and pondered. It pleased him that Cassian was not a coward. Plus he thought about the fact that he could watch him practice with his sword and offer advice. The fathers of the families shook hands. Vivian's father's name was Daemond. He then introduced the family members, wife Annette and eldest son Cassian. Also with them came Marina Matins, a childhood friend of Vivian's. Isabella immediately realized that a mage was sitting in front of her. The Archduchess admitted that she is a shaman, so she can feel the mana flows coming from people. The woman said it's hard to call her the best shaman in the Empire, but she's in the top 5. Isabella continued. She said that there were no traces of black magic on the girl, which meant that she was not the prince's target. Marina claimed that she and the Count had simply been used. The Archduchess felt that Vivian had a wonderful friend, sweet, bright and gentle. Marina did not understand what Vivian had done to Isabel and the whole house of the Archdukes. For when she entered the room, she sparkled like the sun and wore diamonds that could not be bought. Marina realized that her friend was naive, but her character was quite strong and stubborn, so she could handle the situation. But she also had something that needed to be shown to Glenn's family. From subspace, she pulled out a wallet and some sort of document. This evidence was a black sphere that contained black magic inside, and the documents described exactly what kind of magic it was. This orb was identical to the one that touched Vivian. It was about the magic of the cursed charm. The documents listed the name of Cain Shannon, who worked for the Crown Prince and also taught at the Academy of Magical Arts. The original plan was to harm the Archduke with Marina's help, but the bag was opened by Vivian, and things didn't go according to plan. Vivian became upset again, as she realized she could have hurt her lover, but he calmed her down and told her that it was all Asmod's fault and no one else's. Vivian was embarrassed about the Archduke kissing her hand. He didn't understand why he couldn't show his love for his bride. Cassian decided to pick a fight with Glenn again, but his mother sat him back down, and Lennox prodded his brother-in-law. For this he received a blow on the head from his mother. In addition, the Lewis family was cleared of all charges, and the Archduke's family had no doubts about their innocence. Isabella remembered Asmund. When he was little, she had tutored him, and he had respected her and loved her with all his heart. But this man had a perverse form of love. He felt happiness when Lennox suffered. She worried about how he would behave when he found out that her son had a lover. The first phase of getting to know their parents was over, and the Lewis family was going to go get some rest from the road. Isabella wanted to talk to Vivian face to face, so the two of them stood alone in the hallway of the mansion. The woman warned her future daughter-in-law that she would live with them for a while after the engagement, under the pretext of shopping and other feminine pleasures. Isabel had taken the liberty of saying that she would understand if the girl turned her down, as it might seem like a grueling process to her. But to her surprise, the girl immediately agreed to the idea. The Archduchess started to hug Vivian, as she thought she was very cute at this moment. As soon as Vivian left Isabella's, she was met by Lennox asking what she had discussed with his mother. The Archduke looked at his beloved and noticed the blush on her cheeks. She did not answer and said she would go to her room. Since she wanted to go to her room, he decided to carry her in his arms. The Archduke said that there were too many stairs in this house, so if she walked up and down them, her feet would get sore. But Vivian wanted to go herself, as walking up and down stairs was the easiest exercise. But Lennox objected and said it was possible to exercise in bed. Lady Lewis didn't believe that Glenn didn't have a relationship with anyone, as he was acting overly cocky, but he claimed that he only had a relationship with Vivian. But the girl thought that he definitely had a lover, but he only laughed and asked if she had never gotten to know him in the 7 years she had been pursuing him. Nevertheless, he yielded to her, and they walked down the stairs beside each other. Vivian pondered and came to the conclusion that the Archduke really didn't have anyone before her, and then she saw her mother, who was clearly waiting for her. The girl immediately ran up to her mother and said that the Archduchess had invited them to a formal dinner in the evening. So if she wanted any special dish, she needed to say so now, so that the cook could have time to prepare everything. But Annette was concerned about another matter. She didn't want to believe that her daughter shared the same room with the Archduke before the wedding. At that moment, Lennox spoke. He said he had sworn to protect Vivian, so he wouldn't touch her until after the wedding. He also said he was absolutely serious about his intentions, The woman hugged her daughter and said she would take his word for it. Nevertheless, Annette squeezed her daughter's hand and told the Archduke that if he was telling her the truth, he would bear with her until the wedding and not share a room with her treasure. Ron agreed to it, and the woman said she was picking up Vivian, and they met for dinner. Annette realized that this young man would agree to anything to marry her girl. At that moment, Vivian snatched her hand away and threw herself into Lennox's arms, confessing her love for the 100th time. After that, she went back to her mother, and Lennox realized he wanted to marry her quickly. In her room, Vivian plumped down on her bed with thoughts of hurrying to make sure it was dinner time, so she could see the Archduke. The girl was fidgeting on the bed, for she missed her lover very much, and Cassian sat beside her and could not understand what she liked in that man, for he had a terrible temper. Vivian claimed that her fiancé was the best man in the Empire. At that moment, the maids came in and said that they had orders to take care of the girl and help her prepare for dinner. The maids looked at her warmly and dressed her up like a little princess again. It was time for dinner. She and Marina and Cassian walked to the dining room. Her friend said that Vivian was very pleased with her new hairstyle. The Archduke, who had changed into a black suit, was already waiting for them all in the dining hall. So the sweet couple got sideways and started exchanging cute compliments. Lennox said the girl was so beautiful that he wanted to kidnap her and hide her where no one would find her. Cassian was angry and even pushed the Archduke a little because he was blocking the passage, and his sister began to reprimand him for bad behaviour. Lennox and Vivian started calling each other by cute nicknames. This was a test shot to the older brother's head, so Isabella came up behind him and told him to follow her. So, the woman took the girl aside and started complimenting her. Once again, Isabella began to clash with Lennox. He didn't understand why his mother behaved in such a way, but the woman assured him that she was the most well-mannered lady in the Empire. Vivian couldn't believe they were still fighting and had no intention of stopping. Lennox's father noticed that the girl was too embarrassed to sit between two fires, so he lifted her from her seat and moved her to the empty seat at his wife's right hand. The girl's father and Vivian herself were shocked by this act. Damon squeezed his napkin and said that since it didn't matter who sat where, his daughter had to sit next to her. Lennox became indignant. He'd said that Vivian was his fiancée, so she should have been sitting next to him, not his father. Isabella looked at her son and said it was the best option as she would get indigestion around him. Lucas smiled and said that this time his little boy had lost. The Archduke's father courted Vivian, advised her on dishes, and offered to cut her meat into pieces, but the girl said she could do it herself. Isabella kept up with her husband and shoved bits of pheasant into the girl. Vivian couldn't eat anymore and only wanted a drink of water, but instead of water she drank alcohol. The girl's reaction was strange. Lucas and Isabella were worried and wanted to call a doctor. It turned out that Vivian was a little choked up, so Isabella offered her some herbal tea. But Cassian and the rest of her family were thinking that this was probably her first time drinking alcohol. Her parents and brother had already brought Vivian some water, and Lennox stood aside as he missed the moment. Vivian became intoxicated and began to behave quite impertinently and called for the Archduke, as she thought she needed him very much now. She threw herself into his arms and demanded that Lennox kiss her in front of everyone. The young man tried to refuse her, but she was almost crying, so he said he would kiss her a little later. But Vivian kept demanding that he give her not a simple peck, but a real kiss. He tried to convince her that she was drunk, so he shouldn't do it now. The Archduke gave his future in-laws an unkind glare that they began to pretend they didn't see or hear anything. But Isabella and Lucas were no longer affected by that look, so they enjoyed the show and were in agreement that Vivian looked like a rabbit. Nevertheless, somehow magically the mother put the girl to bed and left her room. Annette was worried about her daughter, though she realised that this door could not be opened without a special key, and Lennox had promised not to touch Vivian. Suddenly she remembered herself and her husband in her youth and blushed. Meanwhile, the Archduke sat in his room and realised that he needed to rest, as he was very tired during the day, both physically and mentally. He fell asleep, but then he woke up because he felt someone else's breath next to him, and it was Vivian. He didn't understand how she'd gotten here. The man tried to send her to her room as he knew her mum would be very angry, but Vivian refused to comply. He realised he had to be patient until the wedding and get the girl back to her room by any means necessary. The girl woke up and asked the young man why he liked her so much. The girl didn't realise what she was doing and crawled over to him, trying to kiss him and telling him she loved him very much. The Archduke only breathed a sigh of relief when Vivian fell asleep. The maids were finishing the preparations of dresses and jewellery for Vivian at their master's orders. They understood that all colours would suit her, and of the stones, red and pearls and emeralds. The maids of the Archduke's estate were delighted to have Emma on staff, who had served the young lady for many years. The morning came. Emma was getting the girl ready to leave, and she heard the maids say that their master used to be so cold-blooded that they were afraid to go near him. But everything changed when Vivian came into his life. Now he smiled kindly. So all the maids wanted Lady Lewis to marry their master, and they promised to take good care of her. When she came to the Archduke, at first he could not say a word, and the girl thought that he did not want to marry her anymore. But then he said that she was becoming more beautiful every day. Afterward, Lennox hugged the girl and said that he had originally planned to take a boat ride, but now he wanted to spend the day in bed with her. Then he pulled her away from him, as they needed to wait until after the wedding. But then he noticed that she was trembling all over. She replied that the man keeps looking at her strangely. He replied that he can't do anything about the fact that he wants to eat her. At one point, she started to poke the Archduke in the chest, but then she realized what she was doing. She thought she looked like a pervert at that moment. Since this was happening in front of the servants, she was shy and wanted to hide somewhere. Lennox asked the girl about whether touching his chest was really that exciting. She tried to object. Vivian kicked, but the young man picked her up in his arms and carried her to the exit, licking her hand in the process, which scared her a little and apologized for it. And then he added that even now she looked like a cute little rabbit with her ears down. And Vivian asked Lennox if he knew that when a pair of rabbits fight, the female can punch the male in the face up to 5 times. It didn't have the proper effect on him, but the kiss was an accurate shot. Once the girl calmed down, the man said they could now go for a boat ride. Vivian ran ahead of Lennox. She was glad that there was a small lake and forest in the Archduke's domain. Suddenly she stumbled and almost fell, but Lennox ran up and caught her. It felt like he was teleporting. The young man concluded that the girl should walk around with him in his arms all the time. She thought that if he teleported with her, it would be a very dangerous process. But the Archduke didn't use teleportation. It's just that when someone reaches master level, the mana level increases and the person can move faster. Vivian suddenly remembered hearing about something like this from her brother. And then she said that recently Cassian had said that Lennox was like a monster. At this moment, the Archduke was afraid that his bride had the same opinion. And so they came to the lake. The boat docked on the shore. Vivian questioned the man about what he wanted to ask her, but he masterfully changed the subject of the conversation. They were already sitting in the boat, the Archduke taking up the oars. She didn't understand why he had changed the subject. This kind of behaviour from Lennox frightened her, so she dared to try again to ask what was bothering him. Vivian realised that there was no room for misunderstandings and innuendo in their relationship with the Archduke, so she demanded that he voice his thoughts right now. The young man asked her what she would do if he didn't answer. The girl shouted that if he didn't answer, she would bite him painfully. Lennox smiled slyly and said he liked the bites, so it was better for him. The girl wondered if he'd always been like that. Vivian took offence, since according to him she is either stupid or perverted, so she repeated that she would bite painfully. The Archduke admitted that he would love anything she did towards him, even if it hurt him. Since he didn't want to answer nicely, she decided to resort to the last resort and asked him if he was really honest with her. She felt guilty, but she wanted their relationship to be as honest as possible. Now already Lennox was getting worried. He said he was always honest with her, so he didn't understand why she would ask something like that. The girl said she wanted to know what he didn't say, as she had always been as honest as possible with him. She loved him very much. And then she thought about the fact that she had never written anything about him, because she had neither time nor inspiration. It was a good move, as he replied that he wanted to ask her then about whether she thought he was a monster like her brother. She looked at her lover and realised that she had never thought of him as a monster. Even though she'd already explained to him once what she thought of him, it hadn't been enough. So Vivian said that to her, Lennox is like the sun and stars in the sky that shine brightly. He thanked her for her concern, but then told her that there was another side to him that she had never seen, and that was the reason they started calling him a monster. After that, Vivian suddenly remembered the situation with Viscount Elwyn. Admittedly, she was a little scared of the Archduke then, but if you think about it, she didn't care if that man lived or died, as there was no one more important to her than her lover. So she could now say with certainty that she did not think ill of the Archduke. At that moment, His face became a little shy, and she thought it didn't look good on him. And then she thought she really wanted to draw a portrait of him with that expression. But since she didn't have her drawing supplies with her, she decided to memorize every detail. Lennox was a little surprised that a girl liked him whether he was good or bad. The girl said that if the whole world and him were drowning in that lake, she would save him. The young man smiled and thanked the girl for this attitude and then kissed her. Lennox replied to her that he would have saved her too, not the world, as she was the most precious thing in his life. The Archduke then decided to show his beloved what he loved most about his estate. They sailed to one very beautiful and quiet place that the young man had liked since he was a child. At that moment, the girl thought of what the Archduke's childhood had been like. Vivian realized that she hadn't been a fan of his since she was a child, so now she was curious about that early life. She decided to ask his mother if there were any portraits of little Lennox left in the house. She thought that even then he had been very sweet. So she was going to ask Isabella to show her this miracle. After that, she wanted to reach out and touch the water. She did so and began to fall into the water. The Archduke became frightened and screamed, calling her by name. Then he jumped into the water and pulled Vivian to shore. She began to cough a little. Vivian had a strange sensation. She felt like she was still in the water, though the young man pulled her to shore and held her in his arms. Lennox squeezed her hand and asked her to be patient for a while, as they were soon to be at the mansion. He clutched her to his chest and ran, almost crying home. When he got to the mansion, all the servants ran to him. The man explained to the servants that the girl had accidentally fallen into that very lake. Vivian didn't understand why everyone was so excited and why the lake was the one. The servants quickly ran to heat the fireplace to warm the lady. The maid ran to prepare a hot bath. The butler said he would bring hot tea now. Meanwhile, the Archduke brought the girl into the room and told her that it was necessary to remove her clothes, for if she did not, her body temperature would drop. So he started to undress in front of her, and as much as she felt bad, she asked him not to. He was now standing in only his pants, and she was in only her shirt, as he had quickly removed her dress before, and the girl sat sneezing and indignant. And the young man kept smiling and saying that in this life he could do everything, as he was a very talented person. Now it was time to go to the bathroom to warm up. He picked her up in his arms again and carried her to the door, though the girl objected to it, saying she could walk to the door herself. And now the two of them were sitting in the bathtub. Vivian felt good as she warmed up. The Archduke, meanwhile, hugged her, and Vivian said it was somehow too much since they weren't married yet, and he parried and said it was just a hug. The man said he was well in control, so she could relax and rest. But the engagement and wedding had to be done quickly, or he would die. Vivian thought about what had happened to her at the lake. The Archduke said that by that lake the last death occurred 200 years ago, as a spirit now dwells there, for a man bound to him by a contract died. It turns out that the ancestor of the Glen family was an elementalist. That man is dead, but the spirit who made a contract with him is not, and lives in that lake. And now that spirit had taken an interest in Vivian. Lennox was sure that as soon as his mother found out about it, she would not leave his fiancé. The girl didn't understand why this spirit was interested in her. After all, Isabella was an elementalist herself, so why didn't she make a contract with him? It was because she had already made a pact with another strong spirit at that time. They had already left the bath and were about to drink tea. Indeed, elementalists rarely contracted with large numbers of spirits. The Archduke, on the other hand, apologized to Vivian for the unfortunate outing, but she said she'd had a lot of fun. Perhaps Lennox wanted to say or do something else, but 3 concerned women flew into the room and he fell silent. It was Marina, Isabella, and Annette. They peppered her with questions and remarks, for they saw that her hair was still wet, and they had heard of her falling into the lake. Vivian, on the other hand, said she just took a bath with the Archduke, and this caused a seizure in everyone. That's how they did it before they got married. So the day of the engagement came. Vivian hadn't been able to sleep at all the night before, and now, when her mother and Marina were getting her ready, she was very tense. The girl was worried that it might all be a dream, and as soon as she woke up, the Archduke would not be there, and she would be at home in her room. Marina teased her and said that she was the most virtuous girl in the world, and now the outfit was ready, and Vivian was beautiful in it. Everyone was delighted with her, but only the girl herself could hardly hold back her tears, and Emma and the others told her to pull herself together, as it was only an engagement, and there was a wedding ahead of her. Marina, on the other hand, asked her friend to have fun, because today was such a wonderful day. At that moment, Walter the butler came to her chambers and said that if she was ready, it was time for her to go down to the great hall. The girl called her mother and Marina and went downstairs. She was pleasantly surprised, no, even shocked by the decoration of the hall. And there were an incredible number of guests. Vivian had hoped that there wouldn't be so many guests, since they had announced their engagement at the last minute. At that moment, Isabella waved her hand and beckoned the girl over to her. A handsome young man stood beside her. The Duchess said that she was probably so happy and joyful lately, since she could see Vivian every day, and stroked her head. Then she said that the girl was very pretty today. The man who was next to Isabel turned to them. They recognized him as the Crown Prince, Asmod Bleak Elferdon. Vivian sat down in a deep curtsy, introduced herself, and said she was very happy to see him at their humble celebration. Asmod said he had heard about her, and then added that it was no wonder Lennox had taken a liking to her, for she was a very nice girl. The prince said the girl shouldn't have been so worried, for he and the Archduke are like brothers. Asmund leaned over to her and said that Vivian was a very pretty girl today, so he understood why Lennox had chosen her. Vivian noticed that the young man's voice was soft and sweet, but it had the scent of a poisonous flower. This led her to conclude that the man in front of her was a very dangerous man. The girl knew that all poisonous flowers and mushrooms looked very pretty, and then she thought of the Archduke and became in a moment very sweet, for her fiancé was not poisonous, though he was handsome. Vivian noticed that the auras of the Archduke and the prince were very different from each other. The former was a beautiful predator, the latter a poisonous serpent. She realized that next to the heir to the throne, she had no right to let her guard down, as he would immediately bite her and not even notice. The prince, however, was curious as to the circumstances under which she had met Lennox. He knew exactly how they'd met, but he'd asked. He knew exactly how they'd met, but he'd asked about it too. Asmod was unrealistically handsome and took advantage of that by pretending to not know or understand anything, and handsome guys were her weakness. Suddenly, she remembered that there were two large groups of fans in the fan world, so the first included those girls who praised the Archduke's cold beauty. The second group included girls who were crazy about the mocking notes in her soft voice, golden eyes, and russet hair. The Crown Prince, however, continued his flirtations and asked Vivian to dance with him, but then looked behind her back and told her that the first dance should belong to Lennox. The Archduke looked very anxious and threatening at the first minute, but the girl responded to his handshakes as if to say that she was on his side. Asmod watched this and then said that the two were not suited for each other at all. Vivian was now angry, standing between two fires and thinking aloud that since he was a prince, he could do anything. She understood that she and the Archduke were like heaven and earth, so they might not look good together. But she didn't understand how such a thing could be said to her right to her face. But the prince would not relent in any way. Now he said he was very sorry for Miss Lewis. Asmod looked at Lennox and said that his fiancée, unlike him, was a very kind and sincere girl. And the one inside has only emptiness, like a swampy mire that draws one into its abyss. Lennox parried and said that such an effect was produced by his soul only on the prince, and the latter thought it a compliment. Vivian clung to her fiancé, realizing that he wasn't complimenting his rival, and then he said he hadn't invited him to their engagement party, so he didn't understand why he'd come. The prince, on the other hand, claimed to have a good relationship with the Archduke, so he felt obliged to be here. Asmod thought for some reason that he and Lennox were friends, and his fiancé liked people who had friends. The Archduke looked at the bride, and then told His Highness to leave quietly and not to cause unnecessary trouble, but he only started laughing loudly. The young man was clearly hysterical. He couldn't believe that the Archduke could be so sincere with someone. Lennox didn't understand him, and asked him if he thought he could get engaged to someone without having strong feelings. Vivian clenched her fists. She wanted to throw herself at the prince with fists, because he insinuated that since they were so hasty in their engagement, it meant that the girl was pregnant before the marriage. But it was only now, as the guests began to whisper around her, that she realized that this whole conversation had been overheard by absolutely everyone who had come. At this moment, the Archduchess appeared beside them with fresh drinks and struck her nephew on the head. The blow was painful, so the guy crouched down in pain. The woman said that his manners had deteriorated since the last time they'd seen each other. She asked the prince how he dared to say something in front of her that could hurt her son and his fiancée. Had he really had enough of life? The young man was like a puppet in her hands, and Vivian suddenly remembered that Isabella's rank was the highest in the empire. The archduchess dragged the heir to the throne with her, saying they hadn't seen each other in a while and should spend some time together. The woman gave the boy's shoulder a little squeeze so that he bent down and said she was sure he liked the idea of Lennox's wedding. Vivian, on the other hand, chuckled at the position the prince found himself in, as she considered it karma for all his words. But here Lennox did not share her amusement, and his face was now extremely angry and frightening. With one look, he promised to kill anyone who dared to spread rumours of the nonsense his cousin was talking. Vivian, on the other hand, realised that she liked the Archduke in any display of her emotions and feelings, and he was already asking her how much she was hurt by Asmod's words. Lennox tried to pretend that the girl had nothing to worry about, but she realised that it was just the opposite. Vivian said they were engaged now, so it was normal to worry about each other. He, on the other hand, admitted that it scared him how much more affectionate she could be. The girl looked at him and realised that his words were making butterflies flutter in her stomach again. It was time for the engagement ceremony itself, though Isabella had not yet returned to the hall. So Lennox brought the bride to her parents, who were whispering about something, and it was about the girl, but she didn't understand what it could be about. Vivian was paying attention to minor things as usual, such as Lucas's address. He called her cute, so she thought it meant they had accepted her into their family. The Archduke, on the other hand, immediately recognised something wrong. The elders were talking about the time Vivian fell into the lake. At this moment, a stately, elegant elderly lady came up to them, rolled up her fan, and inquired as to whether this girl was Lennox's bride. This lady was Lennox's paternal great-aunt, Countess Beatrice Glenn Sotley. Lady Sotley did not understand such haste, nor where he had found the little girl. At that moment, Vivian's father and the members of his family introduced themselves to her. Beatrice repeated the Earl's name. She said that although his family was already unpopular in the Empire, it wasn't a bad thing, as there was a certain authenticity to Lennox's choice. Here Lennox took the floor and said that he only wanted Vivian, and he was glad to see his grandmother, as they hadn't seen each other for a long time either. The woman was furious. She didn't understand how her grandson could be enough for Vivian. After all, this wasn't how she had raised him, and she wanted to hit the fan already. The Archduke stated that he had been raised by his parents, and his grandmother said she would not accept Vivian into their family. And if he wanted to marry her, she had to prove herself. At that moment, Isabella appeared with the prince under her arm and said that Vivian had exceptional powers. She went on and said it was something so unique that even the forefather of the Glenn family could rise from the grave. Beatrice interrogated the Archduchess about whether the powers she was talking about were the ones she thought she was talking about, and the woman confirmed it. Vivian didn't know what she was talking about, because she only knew how to be a fan of the Archduke, to draw beautifully and write popular novels about him. But it wasn't about that at all. As it turns out, she was chosen by the spirit of the Glenn family. The aristocrats whispered again, as everyone knew that this spirit had not chosen anyone for 200 years, and now it had chosen this girl. But here's the problem. She didn't have the abilities of an elementalist. And then Isabella said that the spirit of the Glenn family had the highest rank in the bloodline. It was a supreme spirit, with special preferences in choosing a person, so no one knew exactly what criteria he was guided by. The main thing turned out to be that this spirit had an interest in Vivian and no one else. So after the ceremony, Isabella wanted to go to the lake and check things out. Afterward, the Archduchess asked Beatrice if she wanted to check out any more of the girl's talents. The answer was no. Lennox was satisfied, as he realised that in this scenario no one would dare to touch the girl. Vivian, on the other hand, found it hard to accept the responsibility heaped upon her, for everything was happening too fast. The engagement, the spirit, and the ill wishes. The young man continued to embarrass the bride until he was smacked upside the head by his mother and told to focus on the engagement. Lennox gawked at his mom and asked when she wanted to go and test her hunch. Isabel thought for a moment, then said they could go to the lake before the party started and come back after they checked everything out. But Lennox didn't particularly like the idea, but his mother was sure it was a great option for their situation, since everyone got a chance to find out how special Vivian was. The Archduke, however, wanted to be the only one who would know what his bride was capable of. He wanted to be the only man who looked at her, and who she looked at. But he realised that she would be his spouse, but that didn't change the fact that other people's eyes would be fixed on her. even though he wanted to enjoy the girl alone. Isabella stroked her son's head and told him he was a good boy and not to dwell on the little things. The Archduchess asked Vivian not to be frightened, for Lennox had had moments when he had fallen out of reality like that. At that moment, the girl noticed that Asmodee was looking at her intently. He was smiling and drinking wine, but this smile was not at all kind. But then Vivian informed the Archduchess that she loved her son whether he was good, evil, happy or sad. And then the prince could not bear it and laughed out loud, not holding back, saying that Lady Lewis was a very natural girl. Laughing, Asmod said that he was interested in Vivian and asked his cousin not to be hard on him, as perhaps this girl would attract and entertain him. Isabella's face changed and she told Asmodee that he was being too brazen, so she decided to teach him a lesson as soon as the engagement was over. The Archduchess told Asmodee to behave himself, for he knew how terrible she could be in anger. And she told her son that Lennox should be more serious too, for he was to be married soon, so she did not want this sort of thing to go on. At this moment, Vivian suddenly realized that the Crown Prince had misunderstood something, so she decided to approach him for clarification. The young man allowed the girl to speak while calling him by name, but the girl decided to call him Your Majesty, the Crown Prince, and then said that she had understood him correctly, that there had recently been talk of her being seduced by him. As uncomfortable as it was for her to talk about such things, she asked him to refrain from saying such things as it was inappropriate. She thought that when he said it in front of strangers, it was bad for her reputation. And besides, even if he tried to seduce her to the Archduke's disadvantage, he wouldn't succeed. Vivian then grabbed Lennox's arm and dragged him away from the hall as Asmodee began to glare at her. Running away from the prince, they went to the balcony where the winter flowers smelled. She hoped that here the Archduke would calm down a little. To calm the man down, she pulled a candy bar from her pocket and gave it to him. Lennox happily gobbled up the candy, and the girl smiled and asked him for another bite. Vivian watched her fiancé's mood change. She figured he didn't like the dark chocolate, so he was upset. But it was not so, and the Archduke kissed the girl. The young man said his mood was much better after he ate a sweet and kissed the girl. It came to Vivian that by sweet he meant definitely not candy, and then he hugged his bride tightly and thanked her for treating him this way. The girl was happy. She liked to snuggle against the Archduke's body, for it was warm and strong. The girl said it was now time to go back to the Great Hall to exchange rings, and he asked her if she had any more candy, but she didn't. The Archduke, on the other hand, claimed that it wasn't true and she had a pocket full of candy, but she didn't want to give him any more even if he asked for it. Since she doesn't give him any more sweets, he decides to start kissing her again. He hugged her and told her that the girl's lips were much sweeter than chocolate. Vivian, on the other hand, was sure the Archduke was much sweeter than she was. Vivian gritted her teeth at the man's indignation and double standards, but she was determined that it shouldn't happen again, so she grabbed his tie, pulled him to her, and kissed him. Suddenly, the girl noticed that the young man's pupils dilated, so she decided to run away from him. Vivian suddenly realized that if the young man caught up with her, they would become the kind of couple that openly showed their feelings in public. At that moment, the girl saw Lucas and ran up to him for help. He grabbed her by the shoulders and told her she was too cute. The man he was talking to agreed with that statement, and the Archduke's father was already asking her about what had happened to her. She begged her future father-in-law to save her from Lennox, who was closing in on her like a storm cloud. The young man insisted that the girl go with him, or else he would just go crazy. Lucas asked his son about whether they had had a fight, but he replied that they hadn't, and Vivian had just run away from him. He confessed to his father that he tortured his fiancée, to which the man said that if the son continued to torture the girl too much, one day she would truly run away from him. Vivian, on the other hand, looked at her fiancé and realized that he wanted to hear that she wouldn't run away from him, but he kept teasing and mocking her. For once, the girl decided not to fall for her fiancé's sweet face and clear the air right here and now. At first, she was determined to teach the Archduke a lesson, but then she quickly gave up, for he had too sweet and handsome a face, and she considered that in such quarrels, the one who loves more yields. So she went up to her fiancé and told him that she would not run away from him and would always be at his side. Her words made him blush, and he said he would not let her go under any circumstances. Finally, it was time for the ring exchange. In truth, the ceremony was simple. They just had to exchange rings in front of everyone. The decorations that the Archduke had prepared for the occasion were dazzlingly beautiful. Under the gazes of a crowd of aristocrats, relatives, and a priest, They exchanged rings. Vivian remembered that Lennox had prepared these rings 6 months ago. She didn't know how to react to his secret preparations for this day. It was still hard for her to believe that they had thought they had loved each other unrequitedly for 5 long years. It seemed to the girl that since she had fallen in love with him first, she had stronger feelings. As she slipped the ring on Lennox's finger, the priest announced that the engagement was complete, and she thought the moment was like a dream. Some applauded, others and the Archduke's female fans wept bitterly. Everything was fine exactly until she thought about the fact that now she would be envied, and possibly hated, by the girls who liked him too. Now the girl was starting to feel a little worried about it. And she was most worried about the actions of the Marquis Maurice's daughter, for the girl had gone to great lengths to marry Lennox. The Marquis's wife supported and helped in every way possible for her daughter to achieve her goal, but everything went down the drain. At the gala, among the crowd of aristocrats, Vivian saw to her relief no family of the Marquis Maurice. The girl hoped she wouldn't have any problems later on, but realized she was probably wrong. After all, she could perfectly see Asmod standing on the balcony, smiling wickedly as he watched the pair of them. The ceremony was over, so there was time before the banquet, and everyone came to the lake where the spirit of the Glen family resided. Lennox hugged her, and the girl herself realized that she was the center of attention today, as everyone was intrigued that she was the one the spirit might choose. Vivian worried greatly that the assumptions about her spirit image would be wrong. She feared that she and the Archduke might have been separated, but she realized that they belonged together. The girl wasn't going to let go of Lennox, so she clung to his arm, and he asked her to continue to be a little more generous with her touch and stuff. She alluded to kissing, which could be more than just on the lips. Vivian didn't realize where other than her lips she could kiss him, and he said wherever her soul desired. The man kept teasing her, so she started pinching his cheeks and realized he had very smooth and soft skin. At this moment they were called to her by the archduchess, thus interrupting their fascinating occupation. So Isabella put Vivian at the water's edge and said they'd start the inspection any minute. After that, she began to recite some kind of spell. After she finished reciting the spell, a spirit appeared out of the water in front of Vivian. Something that looked like a blob landed right in the girl's hands. One droplet turned into 2 droplets with ears that bounced in her palms. The spirit kept hopping and hopping in her hands, and she didn't understand why it had a rabbit-like shape. It struck her as a bit of a wicked joke, but Lennox explained that sometimes spirits adopt the characteristics of those they contract with. Vivian savvy that she hadn't contracted with anyone yet, but her fiancé said she would soon. The spirit kept jumping around the girl, while she poked his calf with her finger and asked if he had really chosen her. The girl resented the fact that the spirit had dragged her into the lakes. For a little more, and she would surely have gotten sick. Vivian couldn't hear the water rabbit's voice. That was how they didn't have a treaty yet, but his whole look said he was sorry. Vivian didn't particularly like him, but Lennox's grandmother and cousin intimidated her, so she thought it would be best if she made a contract with him. So after a moment's pause, the girl said she would make a contract with the spirit of the Glen family. In the same instant, the spirit kissed Vivian on the forehead, and she thought he looked more like a puppy than a rabbit. The spirit then turned into a ring and said that he had made it especially for her. She was upset because he had her voice. To top it all off, the spirit could now read her mind, and she realized that this was a real invasion of privacy. Vivian realized that all her dark past, and the odd things she did in her delirium, would now be known by this magical being. Lennox noticed his lover's strange condition and asked if she was okay. She clutched at her fiancé's jacket and screamed that this spirit was interfering in her personal life and called it a fraud. Vivian wanted to take off and throw away the ring the spirit had given her, as her wedding ring would suffice, but the spirit tried to calm her down. The magical being assured her that he wouldn't do anything she didn't like, so he asked her to calm down. He explained that he could only talk to the girl when he was inside the ring that mediated between them. If she took it off, they would not be able to talk. Vivian realized the contract was done. The spirit said she could call him by name whenever she needed him. His name was Undine. The girl asked the spirit to take care of her. Undine asked her to do the same. Isabella then ran up to the girl and congratulated her. Then Cassian came up to her and asked her sister if she was an elementalist, and she was unsure but confirmed it. And then her parents came up to her and congratulated her and told her they were very proud of her. Vivian hoped that in this way she could earn acceptance and be at ease with her lover, and he gave her his hand and told her it was time for them to go into the house, as it was getting chilly. The Archduke and Lady Lewis were climbing the stairs, and she confided to him that she still could not control the spirit well. However, she promised him that she would learn how to do it soon. The man looked intently into her eyes and said he was sure she would do well. Knowing her, he took a promise from the girl that she would not overwork herself. The young man hugged his bride tightly and said that he wanted to hide her from everyone and not show her to anyone, as he knew she would have a hard time in high society. Vivian herself realized that everything would not be so easy. The banquet began, and it was not without adventures. Namely, the only princess of the empire named Diana asked her to dance. At that, Lennox and Asmod's faces skewed straight up. But before that, Vivian was focused on food and gobbling, as she was quite hungry after all the events that had already happened. She found the sweetest dish and savoured its flavour. And then she accidentally dropped her fork and thought about the fact that if the Archduke saw this, he would tease her again. But it wasn't Lennox who was looking at her. It was the prince. He noted that she had a good appetite, so he wondered if the dish was good. She didn't understand why he was hooking up with her while pretending to be a kind and decent man. Vivian began to search for the Archduke with her gaze, and noticed that he was talking to the guests of honour at the banquet. Now Asmod was mocking her and saying that she was like a rabbit, because the first food she ate was fruit. The girl was angry because only her fiancé could call her a rabbit. The prince noted that such a thing could hardly be satiated, so he promised to bring her more. But Vivian didn't let him go. She grabbed him by the shoulder and told him that if she wanted to, she could go and get a refill herself. The girl didn't want Asmod to force her to eat, and Marina wasn't coming, so she decided to eat what was on her plate quickly. She quickly shoved the dessert into herself, jumped up from the table, and went into the hall, the prince following her tail. And just as she approached the Archduke, someone grabbed her arm. She turned around and saw the princess asking where it was that Lady Lewis was in such a hurry. Vivian was shocked as she was held by the hand of the Emperor's only and precious daughter, Diana. So when she offered to dance with her, the girl immediately agreed. Vivian went with Diana to the centre of the hall to dance, as she considered that the latter was saving her from Asmod. But then she was stopped abruptly by the Archduke and told that he would not allow it, as Vivian belonged to him. He insisted that the princess let go of his fiancé's hand. Vivian realised that the Archduke was watching her, and also today he was shining brighter than usual. Diana let go, but was clearly annoyed as she took offence at her cousin trying to appropriate the girl for himself. The Emperor's second son, Israfel, approached them. He noticed that Lennox was surprisingly showing his true feelings in public, while Asmod couldn't get into the conversation. Everyone around was surprised that practically the entire imperial family was gathered at the banquet, as well as the fact that the prince called the Archduke his brother. Vivian knew that there was a strange relationship between the second prince and the Archduke. Lennox looked at the prince so that he would not approach him, and the latter clung to him like a faithful puppy. Vivian also knew that her lover was reluctant to get close to other people, but here her imagination painted a completely vulgar picture of the two of them. The girl remembered that among the groupies there were those who associated the Archduke with Israfel, thus making a triangle catastrophe. At this point, the prince asked her what she liked about Lennox. She said in all seriousness that her fiancé was very handsome. Israfel thought she was being superficial, as she was only looking at the groom's looks. It had been hard for her to object to something like that before, but now she had something to add. So she said that she also liked Lennox's gentle voice and his affectionate gaze directed at her. And she was also attracted to the Archduke's honesty in his words and actions. After such a speech, the second prince's eye twitched. He could not believe that the girl had called the Archduke affectionate and tender. The young man hesitated, embarrassed, and realised that Lennox was only like this with Vivian. At that moment, Vivian realised that the second prince and Princess Eunice were her rivals for Lennox's heart and hand. Vivian thought about it. Lennox noticed this and asked what had happened, but she didn't answer immediately and thought about Princess Eunice, though she realised that the Archduke had to solve this problem. But she was worried about it too. But she didn't want to discuss the subject, so she asked her fiancé when she could get her first dance with him. Since that was the case, they stood opposite each other and laughed, and the other prince marvelled, for he had not seen the Archduke like this ever before. Meanwhile, Lennox was already holding out his hand with Vivian, inviting her to the first dance. Vivian gladly and happily accepted his invitation to dance. The girl suddenly remembered Princess Diana, but the latter was whispering to her that everything was fine. But Prince Asmod was drilling her with an angry look. And now they were ready to spin in a dance, as the girl stopped and asked the Archduke how he knew her favourite song. The young man admitted that he had done a little investigating and learned everything he could about her. So now he knew about everything she loved and hated. The girl realised that he knew about all her secrets and secrets. The music started and they began to dance. Lennox said that during this time she stepped on his foot 5 times, but it was nothing because he had strong legs, and Vivian promised to wear high heels next time. In the young man's opinion, it was a bad idea, as then she wouldn't even be able to walk. Such statements made her angry, but the Archduke was enjoying himself heartily and smiling cheerfully. And then he said that, whatever it was, he wanted to learn as much about her as he could, about the preferences he didn't know about yet, down to the most minute details. It was important for Lennox to know how he could pamper and delight her day in and day out. The Archduke invited the girl to go up to the rooms, as he felt that she had already spoiled everyone present with her attention. When they got upstairs, the first thing Lennox did was to start taking off her gloves, as he assumed it would be extremely uncomfortable to walk around in them all day. Vivian said it's not a big deal, so there's no need to worry about such a thing. And then he apologised to the girl for the indelicacy, came quite close and bent down to kiss her. He tormented her soft lips with a kiss, and she realised that was what he meant by being left alone. The young man was literally lying on top of her, but she stopped him as she realised that someone could walk into that room at any moment. But he realised that if today was enough of that, then he would wait for tomorrow. It was time to see the guests off, but the Archduke noticed that she had something interesting around her neck, so he decided to call in the maids with a new dress with a collar, and also to have them fix her hair. So the maids quickly changed her, but the girl liked her previous image better, which spoiled the Archduke. So to the guests, she had to go out in a new one. 3 days after their engagement, they were about to move to the capital, and the girl was nervous as she realised what awaited her there. She was well aware that a hail of gossip, reproaches and other things would fall upon her, but nevertheless she was not afraid, for Lennox was beside her. Besides, her parents were travelling to the capital with them, as well as Marina and Cassian, so she was confident she could handle the situation. Vivian also comforted herself with the fact that she now had sweet Unan. The spirit of the Glen family didn't like that nickname for some reason, so he asked her not to call him that. Vivian petted the spirit. She said she would try hard, but Unan would have to help her a little too. The spirit jumped again and said he would definitely help her. At that moment, the Archduke came up to them and said that the servants had loaded all the luggage and it was time for them to depart. He gave her a hand and helped her into the carriage. On the last step, the girl turned around and kissed Lennox. It was a kiss of gratitude, but then, in the carriage, she regretted 1,000 times that she had done it, for it was not enough for the Archduke, and so they left the carriage red as tomatoes. And so they arrived in the capital of Elfidar. Vivian had decided to meet Marina before her date with the Archduke, but she was nervous about the upcoming date. Lady Lewis, as usual, was acting a little strange in her rejoicing, which her friend noticed, so she asked what she was doing. Vivian was embarrassed and said nothing. Marina did not ask about it further, but said that her friend today is a charm. She began to say that not only today, but recently she has become an incredible beauty. Their goal is to go to the biggest bookstore in the capital to buy love novels. After all, Vivian had a problem. She didn't know what to do when the Archduke touched her. At that moment, the girl realised that she had said something unnecessary and blushed, trying to think of something not to look stupid in her friend's eyes. She admitted that she wanted to buy and read a love novel to gain some experience before the wedding. Marina understood that her friend wanted to try to learn the art of relationships from novels, which seemed a little strange to her, but then she pulled her into the bookstore herself. They walked to the store in complete silence. At this point, Unan spoke to the girl. He was curious that his master wanted to learn about relationships and love from books. She tried to deny the obvious. Vivian resented the spirit meddling in her personal life and said she would learn everything from her teacher. But Unan didn't realise that theory and practice might be different in this case. The girl thought about the practice and one of her kisses with the Archduke. She thought that was what they wrote about in novels, but they had had such a relationship before. Pensive as ever, Vivian tripped and almost fell, but Marina held her up. A friend noticed that Lady Lewis had begun to stumble again, for she might thus soil her beautiful new dress. Marina felt her friend's fever rising, but Vivian reassured her and told her that everything was fine. Vivian talked about how it was too hot outside and she was dressed up today. Marina noted that it was warm outside and said that there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. and Lady Lewis said that the colour of the sky had the same look as the archduke's. So the girls came to the store, and there were too many people there, namely girls. One of the visitors to the store was the Marquise Maurice, who was selecting something. Marina now noticed the Marquis's daughter too, and said that it really wasn't the most pleasant meeting. But her friend realised that avoiding the encounter wouldn't work. The girl thought Marquise Maurice was on Vivian's side, but then why were they hiding behind the racks? Vivian herself realised that her rival adored her novels, or rather Vivi Rabbit's novels. Vivian always hid under a pseudonym to write her novels, so when meeting other aristocrats, she pretended she couldn't write. So she thought she knew she was Vivi Rabbit. Only Marina and the family knew. Marina voiced that the Marquise was a very beautiful girl, so she always had too many suitors. But she was faithful to the Archduke. The enchantress tried to reassure her friend, as she was now the mistress of the Glen family spirit. Vivian and Marina went to the second floor, where there were just love novels, as she wanted to buy something new. But all such books were already taken away. But the novel she wanted to buy, another copy left on the shelf. So this book had a red sticker on it, which meant the contents were 18+, just what the Archduke liked. Since she was 21 years old, it was the right thing to do. Marina asked not to take the novel, as it was very vulgar, but she clutched it tightly to her. Since her friend wouldn't listen to her, the girl said she would go and buy herself some more books on magic, while Vivian decided to find a gift for her fiancé. Lady Lewis had found what she wanted, so she and Marina walked up behind the salesman's counter and asked for their order to be packed. Since Vivian was hungry, they decided to stop by Marina's favourite place to eat. They were on their way to have pancakes and coffee. At the cafe, the girls got themselves 2 cups of coffee and several kinds of sweet pancakes, so Vivian sat back and savoured every bite. As soon as the girls had finished eating, they were about to leave, and Lady Lewis confessed that she had never eaten more delicious pancakes anywhere. At that moment, a woman's handkerchief fell at the feet of the protagonist. She picked it up and wanted to return it to the mistress. But it wasn't a handkerchief. It was a cheque for a very substantial amount of money. Vivian knew that such things were dangerous to even hold in her hands, so she wanted to return the cheque, but she didn't know to whom, as the cafe was too crowded. That's when Unraveling came to her rescue and told her that the object in her hands belonged to a woman with blue hair. So Vivian warned her friend that she would go return the cheque to the stranger, and after that she would approach her and they would move on. The beauty was sitting in a quiet place away from the crowd, and at that moment the protagonist approached her. The girl didn't think long and handed the stranger her cashier's cheque. With her whole appearance, she was trying to say that she was not a thief and wanted that ominous piece of paper taken away from her as quickly as possible. The stranger thought she'd lost her cheque, but Vivian insisted that she take her money and hurry up, which she did. Belle looked intently at Lady Lewis and said that she was no ordinary person. She wanted to buy Vivian a cup of tea, but she refused, saying she was expected downstairs, as she recognised the girl who sat at the table. The protagonist ran to her friend who was waiting for her downstairs, and thought about how a member of the royal family could go to such a cafe. After that, Vivian decided to focus only on her date as she didn't want to ruin it. The girls said their goodbyes and each went about their business, wishing each other a good time. The princess looked at the cheque and realised that a very nice girl had brought it to her. On the way to the date, Vivian almost fell several times but still reached her destination in one piece. There she was already waiting for the Archduke. The girl realised that the groom had been waiting for her for quite some time, though he himself said he had only just arrived. He held out his hand to the bride and asked where she wanted to go today. She noted that he was as beautiful as ever, and off they went. Lennox looked at her and asked why she was not accompanied on the walk by an escort. The girl admitted that she was dating Marina, which is why she went alone. The Archduke did not understand her carelessness, as he did not understand what he should do in a situation where something dangerous would happen to her while she was walking alone. Vivian smiled sweetly and said that would never happen, plus she had her spirit by her side. But Lennox knew that she still couldn't use her spirit power properly. The young man took her hands in his and said he was glad Unraveling was with her, but he asked her to walk with an escort. And then he abruptly changed the subject and asked if she had gotten permission from her parents to live in the same room with him. The girl admitted that her father didn't mind, but her mother was stubborn and wouldn't allow it. The Archduke's parents supported their son's idea of him and his bride living together, but the girl's mother and brother were strongly opposed. Vivian realised that she had managed to win her father over to her side, but her mother had not, and neither had her brother. But his opinion didn't matter to her. but she had an idea how to change Annette's mind. Meanwhile, they continued flirting on the street and looked very happy. So Vivian came up with a plan. She decided to bribe her mother with gifts to convince her that her fiancé was a good man. For this, they went to an expensive store. It was a jewelry store, and Vivian knew that everything here should suit her mother. She couldn't imagine that of all the things in there, the Archduke would offer to buy a poodle brooch for her mum. The girl didn't understand how black pearls could be used to make such a thing, but she didn't know how to tell her fiancé in such a way that it was an unfortunate choice. So she told him she wasn't sure her mother would like this brooch. Since that was the case, he picked up and tossed the item onto a jewelry pad. She didn't understand how things could be handled like that. In addition, the girl noticed that all the workers only revolved around them, so you could feel the stratification of society. Originally, it was a one-stop store, so even now you could find things for every taste. An example would be the strange hedgehog-shaped ring the Archduke chose to use as a weapon. She and Marina came here often, but only bought 1 or 2 things, but other visitors could afford to buy up everything here. Vivian had never been treated as a VIP customer, so when the director of this store himself came out to them now, she was very surprised at his demeanour. The man immediately went to the girl, saying that she was really beautiful, and the rumours were not lying. But the Archduke embraced her and looked at the director as if he had killed him already, and told him not to reach out his hands to his bride. The principal almost cried, but said he understood His Highness perfectly. Vivian didn't understand what had just happened, and a spirit came to her rescue and told her that the Archduke was jealous of her because he wasn't the only one who thought she was a very beautiful girl, so he needed to be on his guard. She looked questioningly at her fiancé and didn't realise if she had given any reason for jealousy. He further offered the bear as a gift, but the girl didn't understand how he had managed to pick the perfect gifts for her up to this point. And here it was, all passing by. Lady Lewis wanted to know how the young man managed to pick out her gifts. Unan already knew the answer, but she wanted to hear it from the groom. Vivian turned to the Archduke, and he was already showing another strange statue. At this point, she mustered up the courage to ask the young man if he always had trouble choosing gifts. He admitted that it was like that, as he couldn't concentrate, but for her he chose gifts easily. It made him think. She wondered why that was so. He admitted that he was focused and thinking only about her, so it was easy for him to choose and give her something. Lennox admitted that he had always thought only of her, and he only cared about her in this life. Vivian suddenly realised that the Archduke's world revolved around her. It seemed to her that he should, by idea, have loved and treated his parents in a similar way, but even if that wasn't the case, it was okay for her. They were very similar in their feelings as her world revolved around him, and she told him again that she loved him very much. Words weren't enough for him this time, so he wanted her to prove it in practice. But she didn't want to do something like that in front of the store employees, so she said she would prove everything after the wedding. She promised that she would do whatever he wanted, but only when the time was right for it. And then she laughed and said they were here to pick out a gift, and she wasn't going to help him with that. She realised that he would kiss her if he caught her, so she ran away again. As she ran off, the young man crouched down, shaking as he didn't understand how his fiancée could be so nice. At that moment, the thought of creating a guidebook about Vivian popped into his head. He knew she had been keeping him at a distance lately, and it was a special kind of torture for him. He was shaking, as he was madly already wanting to marry the girl, as he had almost no strength to hold himself together. He finally picked out Annette's gift, and the salesman said the bride was waiting for him in the restroom, and there was an oil painting waiting for him in the room. Some man was hitting on his Vivian. The stranger tried to clamp down on Vivian and claimed that he had fallen in love with her at first sight, so she had to tell him her name. It was Marquis Rosewalt, who had recently returned from a trip abroad, so was unaware of the current state of affairs. Namely, he had heard nothing of the Archduke's lovely bride. The man started touching her hair, saying he liked its light pink colour. She slapped him on the arm for this and asked him what he was doing. The Marquis was taken aback and thought the girl too impertinent. It was the first time he'd ever seen a girl who didn't fall for that trick, but he wasn't about to back down. But he didn't know that Archduke Glenn was standing behind him. Now, looking at His Highness's face contorted with anger, he was frightened, and Lennox was already thinking of how to kill the man who had dared to show such disrespect with his Vivian. For starters, Lennox decided to break the man's arm and then punch him in the nose to keep him from touching the girl and sniffing around here. But he remembered his mother's admonition that he needed to learn to be more delicate, since he would soon be a husband, and not all problems could be solved with his fists. The young man realized that he had to think about marriage and children, because he had to become an example for his children and a good husband. Lennox realized that he couldn't use physical violence in this case, so he had to think of another way to punish him. Vivian watched his actions intently. He came closer and closer to the Marquis, who was pacing back and saying that he had no right to touch something. The boy didn't understand what he had done wrong. The Archduke was already blacker than a cloud, saying that the girl he was hitting on was his fiancée. Lennox pressed the Marquis against the wall and said that to his regret, the man's habit of changing girls like gloves never changed. The Marquis didn't quite believe it. He understood that the girl was nice, but how she could get the Archduke's heart was strange. His Highness didn't understand why his rival didn't get his words and continued to stare at his fiancée. The Archduke, on the other hand, brought his face close to the Marquis's and asked him to remember that he had not beaten him to death, only because Vivian was standing nearby. The Marquis fell on his knees and began to beg the Archduke to forgive him for having committed a grave sin and allowed himself the impermissible. But Lennox continued to taunt the man, for he dared to molest his treasure. So the Archduke pondered how he could punish this man. He knew that he was in debt like a silk and had not gone into the world only because of his family's perfume business. It was also normal for him to flirt with engaged girls. He was also caught in a scandal with a married woman. Besides, it didn't make any difference to him to have an affair with one or more girls. Lennox said he didn't want to ever see Orland near his fiancée again, and then said that if he had any conscience left, he would go and beg his relatives for forgiveness. And if he doesn't, he's an archduke. Show him real hell. The Marquis fled, and Vivian looked at her fiancé in surprise and admiration. At that moment, Lennox realized that he shouldn't have shown that look on his face in front of Vivian. After all, he wanted to be good for her and not let her run away from him in fear, because he wasn't a good guy like she thought he was. In his thoughts and dreams, he had already locked her away from human eyes to be the only and irreplaceable one for her. He wanted to touch her, but she intercepted his hand and then said she liked touching him. The Archduke was worried that Vivian knew the man. She said that the man was quite famous in the Empire, and then pointed to the young man's hand and said that he had crumpled a gift for her mother. And then she suggested we go to the store and ask them to pack it again. Lennox clutched the crumpled gift to his chest and smiled in agreement. They returned to the store, and the Archduke ordered all the jewellery to be packed on the counter in front of him. Vivian protested and said her mom didn't need that many gifts. The girl said it was better to give gifts gradually. That's what her dad used to do when her mom was angry. After that, they went to the restaurant. Lennox had thought of everything. Lighting, flowers, food, dishes, everything a girl likes. Vivian was definitely enjoying everything, but then she wondered where everyone else in the place was. The young man said that there was probably a new restaurant opening somewhere nearby, so the place was the only ones here today. Truth be told, no one was here, as Lennox had bought out the establishment for their date at this time, and the girl was about to start eating. The man realized that every day it became more and more difficult for him to restrain his attraction to the girl. As they lived under the same roof, bathed together, he could also hug and kiss her. The young man sighed. For him, the situation was already beginning to turn into torture, as his mother-in-law did not want to give permission for their married life. He wasn't sure if the girl understood how difficult he was having right now, but here she was, smiling sweetly and thanking him as the food here was delicious. At this point, she was murderously cute. The Archduke then asked Vivian to feed him, as the Marquis had spoiled his appetite badly. But if she fed him, he could enjoy the meal. In order to feed the groom, the girl sat closer to him, because she would not be able to reach him from her seat. So, she began to feed her lover and noted that he had very nice lips. She was looking at him too intently, so he said he wanted to eat something else, and the girl decided to hurry up and finish here and move on. Next, they went to the greenhouse. Vivian was delighted, as she didn't know it was such a beautiful place. Lennox grinned. After all, this place really hadn't been here before, since he had built it especially for his lover. Vivian was greatly surprised, as she had no idea her fiancé liked such places and things. There was also an upholstered sofa, but originally the Archduke had planned to put a bed there, but common sense prevailed. Lady Lewis loved the greenhouse, and Lennox promised her to come here more often in the future. Since there was no one here, he wanted to start kissing her, but the girl suddenly said that she had prepared a present for him. Vivian held out the book to him with the words that she and Marina had specifically gone to the bookstore because she wanted to buy a book for the Archduke. It wasn't the first time the young man had noticed that although his bride was very nice, she sometimes reacted very strangely. Then he asked for permission to see the contents of the gift. So, he realized that there was a very interesting book in a red cover. And then the Archduke assumed that his fiancée had no idea what she was giving him. He decided to check his suspicions and said it said the juice of a bright red pomegranate got on his lips. Then he asked her how she understood it. The girl said the pomegranate was ripe and juicy. And then I asked about the hill where the honey runs down. She suggested it was a mythological paradise. The young man couldn't stand it and started laughing out loud. She didn't understand what was wrong. Lennox promised to explain everything to her after the wedding, then added that he was concerned that there was another book in the package. He wanted to know what other book was in his fiancée's bag. The girl said that there was another book there, but he asked her what kind of book she had there. But she was in no hurry to tell him. Her face spoke for itself. Vivian said it was just one of her favourite novels, nothing more, and asked him to pretend he hadn't noticed. Lennox was very curious, so he moved closer and closer to the bride, though she tried to protest. So the young man grabbed the girl and put her in his arms. At the same time, she dropped the book on the floor. Afterward, he kissed her on the cheek. Since this place belonged to him, it was just the two of them here, and no one could interrupt them. So he plopped her down on the couch. Vivian, on the other hand, was only thinking at that moment whether there was a way to burn the book bag without the Archduke finding out about the contents. Unan came on the line. He said he was a water spirit, so he couldn't burn the item. Vivian asked him if he could drown the object in water. The spirit was sure that if he did so, the situation would get even worse, as the Archduke would definitely then eat her right here and now. Vivian, on the other hand, didn't want the Archduke to cross the line before the wedding, and she didn't want to show the book. So she said Unan was watching, and the man suggested she take off the ring in that case. The spirit now resented him too, for the cunning Lennox Glenn had been like that since childhood and wanted to separate him from his mistress. The girl asked the groom if it was important for him to see her book. She got an affirmative nod. The girl realized too that she was in a position of no choice. Either she shows him the book or he eats it now. And then she said she didn't taste good. Skinny, low and one tooth. Vivian already knew the Archduke and that he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. So she came up with a solution to this problem. The solution was for the girl to gobble up the Archduke first. Then she kissed Lennox passionately. Her plan was that she would kiss him first thing before the man came to his senses, run away, catch the first carriage and ride home, and then lock herself in a room and not come out until he started begging her for forgiveness. In her head it was different, but in reality he asked to see the book again, for he wanted to recognize it gradually. Afterward, he offered her a deal of one of his secrets for a book. This offer bribed the girl, for she wanted very much to know at least one secret of the Archduke. The girl had spent 7 years gathering information about the groom, but there was still a lot of white spots, so now she was admitting defeat. Vivian pulled out a book, but asked him not to mock her when he saw it, and so the object was in the Archduke's hands, while his bride huddled in the corner of the sofa, unwilling to sit any closer to him. But he sat the girl on his lap and read the title of the book, noting that it sounded quite obscene. He made her read the book with him, or else he would do to her whatever it described. The young man teased no, asking her if she really liked that sort of thing. She said no, and began to assure her that it was just an affair. Vivian didn't get to the most interesting part, as the Archduke took the book from her and asked her if she liked the binding. Lennox reminded her that she had bound him once before, because that spell strengthened people's secret desires. Lennox reminded her that she'd bound him once before, because that spell made people's secret desires stronger. The man, on the other hand, was asking her if she wanted him to eat her, and then he plopped her back on the couch, telling her that he liked to think they mutually wanted to eat each other. Meanwhile, one of the princesses was being told off by her maid, as she had managed to lose her bank check in town. The princess, however, calmly replied that she had lost it at first, but the nice girl had given it back to her, but then she had managed to lose it again. The woman asked the princess to pull herself together, as she was the first heiress of the Ibran Empire. The princess closed the book and said she was lucky because she had Melanie, and the maid said she would have to do an even better job of looking after her mistress. Eunice, on the other hand, asked Melanie what she had been able to find out about Archduke Glenn's fiancé. They had already found out that the girl's family was not rich, and she had a very sweet character, so she won the hearts of many of the Archduke's closest people. The princess had come to this city to find the reason why the Archduke had refused to be engaged to her. But rumors reached her only here that he had made an engagement to another girl. The girl was not going to back down and was going to marry him at any cost for the good of the empire. She thought she would have no trouble breaking the spell of Cinderella, who had charmed a man into becoming his bride. The princess lay on the bed and thought about how the girl who had helped her find the check was very nice, just her type. Her Highness longed to ask the stranger's name the next time she met her. Meanwhile, Lennox and Vivian were getting ready to doughboy. They both thought they had a great date. Lennox was only worried that the main course would not be available to him until after the wedding, and the girl asked him to take his time. He seemed to understand the reason for her excitement, and then said that since they were engaged, it was normal to want to wake up in the same bed. The girl agreed, but didn't want to lay there all day. And when the girl began to frighten him with Isabella, he said that in that case, they would be engaged until death and not marry. He kissed the girl on the forehead and wished her sweet dreams, promising to tell her secret another time. Vivian flushed and realized she was marrying a real sadist. The next day, Vivian asked Isabella to teach her some spirit magic. The woman was very happy to see her. The Archduchess asked the girl to call her mother, and when the girl did, was very pleased and happy. Lady Lewis tried to call Isabella and Lucas mom and dad, but was still very shy. The woman, however, asked if she had received a gift from her son. The Archduchess was getting a little angry with her offspring, because he had decided to monopolize Vivian, and was showering her with gifts, which didn't give her the opportunity to send her anything. And okay for her, but her husband wanted something for his daughter-in-law too. Isabella had no idea that her son had such a strong sense of ownership, as he had completely lost his mind as soon as he fell in love with the girl. But since the Archduchess had already met Vivian, she decided to take her to a place first, and then start the lessons. Isabella brought the girl downtown and told her they were going to have a grand shopping spree today. And they were going to start with the most famous clothing store in the empire. The most powerful ladies of their country dressed here, so they had been invited to Vivian's engagement party. But she didn't remember them. The girl didn't want to hit the dirt with her face, so she was as nice as possible to them, and they succumbed to the power of her charm. One of the women said her daughter would be 15 this year, but she was far from Vivian's level of cuteness. The women talked among themselves but looked at the girl, and then asked how she had met the Archduke. The Archduchess answered for her. She said that her son fell in love at first sight with the girl, as she was very nice when they first met. The woman didn't understand how such a girl could not be loved. Here was her emotionless son melted. The ladies noticed that not only was the Archduke in love with the girl, but Isabella was too. The woman was silent at first, and then said that she wasn't the only one fascinated by Vivian's cuteness, but many others as well. Everyone around her was curious as to how such a thing could be possible, but Vivian herself didn't know the answer to the question of why Lucas and Isabella had been so kind to her. Then the aristocrats decided it was time for them to leave, so they said goodbye to the Archduchess and left. Isabella sighed, as these women annoyed her greatly. Vivian didn't know how best to answer, so she agreed with the Archduchess, though she realized it was a bit arrogant of her. The woman said the girl was very kind and patted her on the head. Isabella hugged her and said that on the other hand, kindness was a weakness, so she promised to protect her for a long, long time. She added that the girl was very careful and worried about little things, so nothing would happen if she was a little rougher. The Archduchess said that Vivian should enjoy the power she had been given. For example, she could order and buy all the dresses in that store. And then it occurred to the girl that her birthday was coming up in 2 weeks. Isabella was worried. She had learned of this event 4 days ago, and she had to prepare for it in advance. The Archduchess began to race the vendors and pick out the girl's outfit and shoes and jewellery. The girl begged her to stop and slow down. The woman bought up half the store and didn't want to stop. Vivian suddenly realised that Lennox was very much like her in that way. Lady Lewis was already grabbing her head, as she had already spent a lot of money. At that moment, someone hugged the girl from the back. It was the Archduke. Vivian thought that the Archduke was busy with business, and then he just showed up. Isabella noticed him and started screaming because she thought he wanted to spoil her date with her daughter-in-law. Lennox objected because he thought Vivian could only go on dates with him. The Archduchess objected and said she wanted to go out with him too. Son and mother argued. He said Vivian was his fiancée, so she would only do such things with him. His mother said it was time for the son to stop monopolizing her daughter-in-law's attention and time. Now the two of them dragged the girl shopping. They started suggesting outfits and demanded that she tell them who picked her outfit better. Vivian said that since they would buy her both of those outfits, she wouldn't have to choose between them. The girl admitted that she liked both Lennox and Isabella, so she asked them not to fight anymore. But they didn't stop arguing. Now they were figuring out which one of them liked Vivian better. While mother and son were figuring things out, the girl decided to sit down at the waiting table. The waiter brought her a free drink. Vivian watched all this and realised that since the Archduke teased her all the time, now let her get it from her mother. Lady Lewis drank her tea and smiled. She was no longer surprised by such altercations. She was used to them and enjoyed watching them. At last they returned to the manor. Vivian was very tired, because she thought that the shopping trip would never end. At that moment, the girl noticed her older brother at the window, who was clearly waiting for her. The young man asked the girl why he couldn't be here. Vivian decided to show her character. She knocked him on the head and told him to stop behaving like that with her. The girl asked why he came here. Cassian admitted that he didn't come to see her but to train. At that moment, the Archduke approached them and asked the young man about his decision to learn swordsmanship from him. Cassian said he just wanted to test his skills, and Lennox thought the man was overconfident. Vivian realised that her brother had signed his own verdict. Cassian wanted to personally see if the Archduke could protect his sister, so they began training. Guy demanded that the Archduke draw his sword and start fighting. The Archduke looked at Cassian and said with a smirk, wondering if he should bare his blade. Nevertheless, brother Vivian did not wait long and decided to attack the Archduke at once, since he was just standing still and waiting for something. But Lennox didn't need a sword to answer the young man. He dodged the boy's attack and struck him under the breath with his fist. Cassian flew back a few meters, but to his credit he quickly got to his feet. Lennox was in his repertoire, hovering over the guy and asking him about whether or not Vivian was safe around him. Such treatment clearly did not please the young count, and he began to attack his opponent again. Lennox dodged the attack and counterattacked with his usual technique without using his sword. The boy fell to his knees, and he said he was sorry his brother-in-law had such poor sword skills. Vivian felt strongly for her brother. She realised that he had done the biggest stupid thing of his life. She realised that her brother would not be able to defeat the Archduke, but he would definitely get bruises on his body, so they would not do without ointment. At that moment, Lucas and Isabella appeared on the training ground and asked what was going on. The Archduchess was outraged. She didn't understand why her son was torturing his fiancé's brother. Lennox claimed that nothing bad had happened, and it was just a normal little sparring session. But his mother was sure of the opposite. For her, it was just a normal beating of a weaker opponent. As soon as the woman approached Cassian, he straightened up, blushed, and began to greet her. She began to examine him from all sides. She realised that this place would not be without bruises, but he was the one who got off easy since nothing was broken. Then Isabella turned to her husband and said joyfully that Vivian would be able to cure her brother, for the spirit she had contracted could not only control water in any form, but could also heal and cleanse people of disease. True, the Archduchess observed that not all elementalists and spirits had this ability, as it was quite difficult. The woman confessed that only 10% of spirit caster in the world could pull off such a trick. Vivian was surprised that she was part of that 10%. The Archduke looked at his bride and said that the skill of spirit control was better developed gradually. The Archduchess said that her brother's wounds were light, so he would act as a test subject for her practice of light healing techniques. At that moment, Unan himself appeared. Vivian understood that they had a rather strange relationship, but the spirit recognized her as his mistress, and he definitely liked her. Isabella, on the other hand, said that intimacy was very important to the caster and the spirit. The more they trusted each other, the more power could be borrowed. The training began. The Archduchess said that the girl must first draw an image in her mind of herself healing all of her brother's wounds. Vivian closed her eyes and did what Isabella had asked her to do. The girl looked at her brother and realised that her fiancé had beaten him up pretty badly, as his entire body was bruised. The Archduchess noticed that Vivian was finished with the first stage, so she explained to her what to do next, to formulate the necessary command clearly and loudly, and ask the spirit to fulfill it. But it should be remembered that everything depended on proximity to the spirit. Vivian understood and proceeded to the second step. And then the magic began to happen, which was directed at Cassian. The spirit appeared in the girl's palms and it was without ears, but then the ears reappeared. The young man was under the impression of healing magic. The archduchess began to hug her daughter-in-law as she was happy that she was able to perform such powerful magic on the first try. Cassian looked over his body and couldn't find a single bruise or scratch on it. Lennox clapped his hands and said that he didn't even doubt that she was going to be a success. Lucas praised the girl too. But now, there was another important moment. The archduchess asked Vivian if she had felt something leave her body during the sorcery. The girl nodded her head in agreement. The point was that the caster exchanged her life force for abilities and spirit power, meaning that if the girl wanted it to rain for a month or cause a natural cataclysm, she would die. So Isabella asked her not to abuse her powers. 1293. Vivian suddenly realized that spirit magic was quite dangerous, and one had to be careful with it. Then the girl wondered what Undine had been like when she signed the contract with the founder of the Glen family. After a brief pause, Isabella said the spirit took the form of a large and elegant bird. Then she exchanged eloquent glances with her husband and sighed. The best part is that even then, the spirit took the cute shape of a little chicken. But this point was omitted in the historical record, so as not to damage the credibility of the Glen family. Vivian only noticed that her brother had gotten into another fight with her fiancé, even though she had healed his wounds a minute ago. The young man again failed to repel the Archduke's attack, so he ended up on the ground. At that moment, his sister approached him. She sat down next to him and said that her brother would never win this fight, as even their age categories are different, not to mention their skills. And then she praised him and didn't expect her brother to turn red and have tears in the corners of his eyes. She didn't understand why Cassian was suddenly crying and didn't know how to calm him down. And then the Glen couple came up to them. Lucas and Isabella laughed at their son as they saw that he was intensely jealous of his fiancée, even of her own brother. Meanwhile, Vivian was coaxing her brother to get up and go with her to the house, and there they could nibble on some delicious desserts. The adventure didn't end there. The guards informed him that the Crown Prince had arrived at the manor. He'd already shown up uninvited at the training field and said he'd be sorry if he missed something so interesting. He offered Lennox to fight. The condition of the fight would be, the loser fulfills the winner's wish. The Archduke, as always, fell for the prince's words, and now they were preparing for the duel, and the Archduchess asked her daughter-in-law who she thought would win. The girl was sure it would be her fiancé. Lennox didn't understand where Asmodee got so much confidence in victory, but he ignored his cousin and flirted with his soulmate. The prince took off his jacket and said that he considered such speeches to be very rude to his person. Lennox parried that he was not sure that Asmod was worthy to be the heir to the empire. Both opponents took a wait-and-see attitude and did not attack first. But the prince, like Cassian before him, couldn't stand it and rushed to attack first. One must admit that the lunge was a good one, as the Archduke had to make an effort to evade the attack. The knights froze in suspense as they watched the duel. One of them was Lloyd, and as soon as Vivian looked at him, the boy was twisted in half by the memories. The fight was beautiful, but the Archduke managed to counterattack and knock the sword out of his opponent's hand. The prince saw himself dropping the weapon, and it was already on the ground. Vivian thought this was the end of the fight, so she rushed to hug her lover. Lennox was in no hurry to hug her back, as the prince had made him sweat profusely, and it was embarrassing him now. Lady Lewis did not understand why he was so worried about such a thing, for she could smell the scent of lavender emanating from him, and only that. So she thought that maybe the Archduke wasn't human, but an elf or fairy. At this moment, Asmod approached them. He noticed that not many people in the Empire could be so at ease with his cousin. Meanwhile, Vivian was beginning to pout, as she realized that the prince kept calling her fiancé by his first name, while she had never once done so, and addressed the one using a title. Asmod also noticed that Lennox was very nice to the bride, so he wondered what made the girl so special. The girl was angry, because if she was not loved by the Archduke, the prince's evil joke could completely destroy her family, and he did not want to admit that the evil magic was his doing, and did not want to ask her to forgive him for his bad deed. His Highness looked at her carefully, and then said she had it written all over her face that she didn't like him. But Asmod asked her if she would accept his invitation when he sent it, as he wanted to get to know her better. And he did it in front of everyone who was on the field, so refusal would mean an extreme degree of disrespect to the heir. The girl did not understand how a decent and fair man like the Emperor had such a harmful and evil son. The Archduke answered for her. He asked his cousin why his bride should accept another man's invitation. The prince decided to play the role of a fool and said that he just wanted to get to know the girl better and get closer to her, as he had an interest in her. The young man continued to insist that he had not lied about his feelings, and then held out his hand to her, saying that although he and the Archduke were engaged, they were not yet married, so he had decided to call her by her first name. At this point, Lennox couldn't stand it. He grabbed the prince by the collar and started threatening violence. Asmode, on the other hand, was smiling. He asked his cousin if he remembered what he had said as soon as he arrived at the manor today. The bet wasn't over yet. He too had feelings for the girl. So he released his hand from the Archduke's grasp and said that he was now doubly curious as to which of them would win the sparring match. That day began the stormy period of Vivian and Lennox's relationship, and Asmode left for his place with a sense of accomplishment. The mood of the people in the manor changed. Everyone was tense. On one such day, Cassian came to visit his sister, drinking tea and saying that he had never imagined that the prince was so crazy. Isabella was also shocked, though she had envisioned different scenarios, but she had not foreseen this either. Vivian was worried too. She remembered Marina's words that love to the grave was good, but there was something more important for a relationship: trust. Without it, everything would collapse like a house of cards. Suddenly the thought occurred to Vivian. Did her fiancé think she would leave him and go to the prince? So she stood up abruptly and informed everyone that she was going upstairs to look for her fiancé. Then she asked the archduchess to make sure that no one bothered her and Lennox for a while. She was exhausted, though she hadn't reached the room yet. She remembered the archduchess's words that spirit control spells required vitality and stamina, so she decided to exercise. She finally reached his room, knocked, but no one opened her door. Since Lennox wouldn't open the door for her, she decided to go in herself. So when she opened it, she stumbled and fell into her fiancé's arms. He had been taking a bath, so he didn't open it right away. So now he was looking at the girl and asking her how she was feeling. She bounced away from him, grabbed her head, and started telling herself that she should have waited until after the wedding and not done anything like this. Lennox leaned toward her a little, the robe sliding off his shoulder, and then Vivian kissed him first. She jumped right on him in the hallway with kisses, nearly wallowing him on the floor with her advances. The girl wanted to backpedal as usual, but he pinned her against the wall and asked where the frightened rabbit who was afraid of him and ran away all the time had gone. The man admitted that the girl has no sense of proportion, and he has to constantly restrain himself, even when she provokes him. Vivian tried to deny it, saying it was a simple smack, but the Archduke thought she had barged into his room and brazenly kissed him. Now there were negotiations about their wedding between the senior members of the family, but the prince came and stirred their peace. So the girl came to the groom to calm him down, and he told her that even if she fell in love with the prince or another man, he would never let her go, as she was only his and no one else's. Vivian realized that the Archduke had not captured the essence of what she was trying to express, so she realized that she needed to put everything into words. So she began her speech and said that for her there is only the Archduke. Even on pain of death, this will not change. The girl said that this time she gathered all her laughter in her fist to tell him something important, and asked him to listen carefully. She warned him that she would only say it once, so he should memorize it well. She looked into his eyes and told him that she loved him. The girl was worried because she had never confessed her love to him, even though they were about to get married. The man was silent, and she begged him to say something, for she was very much worried. Vivian squeezed her eyes shut. She was very scared, so she wanted to run away, but restrained herself with her last strength. The young man, in his own way, also restrained himself, but then he plopped her on the bed. He'd promised her he wouldn't cross the line tonight, so she could take it easy. He realized that the situation was getting dangerous, but he promised that he wouldn't mess around until after the wedding. Lennox hugged Vivian and thanked her for her candor, then made a return declaration of love. Lady Lewis was very happy and hugged her fiancé in return. The Archduke sat down next to her and said that even though they had confessed their feelings for each other, he still continued to worry. The girl did not understand why he continued to worry. He looked her in the eye and asked her if she still thought he was a kind person. He wrapped his arms around his knees, for he realized that from years of observation, she must have known what kind of man he was. And the man was partly right, for it was not to say that she did not know his character and actions. But in that moment, 7 years ago, she didn't care how he treated other people, for to her he had become the only bright star in the night sky. The Archduke confessed that he was a selfish man, but Vivian thought she was too. She surprised the groom very much, as he considered her the kindest person in the world. And if you compare the two of them, she was a real angel. He took her hands in his and told her that even now he wanted to lock her in his room forever, to have her only his and no one else. Then reached out to her and told her she didn't know or understand anything. The truth was, he wasn't going to show her how dangerous he was until after the wedding. Afterward, he hugged his bride tightly again, and she wondered if there was anything she could do to soothe his heart and thoughts. At home, Vivian had a conversation with her mother. Annette gave her permission for her daughter to live with the Archduke. The girl threw herself around her mother's neck, hugged her tightly, and thanked her for her blessing and permission. Annette admitted that she was very afraid that the aristocrats would start spreading rumours about her beautiful daughter, but it is most likely because of the family her fiancé is from. But still she hoped that everything would be fine. Annette was angry that her daughter was not at all sad about leaving her birth mother, who had spoiled her so much while raising her. When Vivian was in her room, she decided to write to Lennox and tell him the good news. But then the butler brought her a letter. She wondered who it was from, and then she saw that Gwendolen Morias had sent it to her. Vivian didn't understand why the Marquis's daughter had sent her a letter, as they weren't close enough for such gestures. To find out what was what, the girl opened the envelope. There was an ordinary invitation to one of Gwendolen's events, and Lady Lewis hoped for a personal letter. Vivian was well aware that the Marquis's daughter probably didn't like her, and the realization was very unpleasant. Lady Lewis used to watch the girl and wanted to get close to her and become friends, but that didn't happen. So, Vivian was invited to a salty party. On the one hand, she was embarrassed to go there now. On the other, it would be impolite to refuse. But she had until the end of tomorrow night to think about it. And now she planned to write a letter to the Archduke. Be that as it may, and her meeting and relationship with Lennox was the greatest good fortune of her life. Vivian now understood the Archduke's desires for the wedding to take place as soon as possible, and was willing to go along with it. She went to the window and realized that after the wedding, they would be husband and wife. The girl went out on the balcony and decided to give her fiancé a lot more love than she was giving him now. She realized that although Lennox had loving parents, he had always been lonely. For being the heir of the family, he had been busy with his studies from his earliest childhood, so even seeing his parents was a rarity for him. Vivian wondered what Lennox had been like as a child. If there was magic that could create such a miracle, she would use it once. So she got dressed and went out to the park. Before doing so, she gave the letter to the Archduke for delivery. She remembered that there was a young lady who had caught the flu not long ago when she had frozen in the street. That girl was Gwendolen Morias, but Lady Lewis decided to push these thoughts away from her. At that moment, she felt someone's gaze on her and started looking around. She thought it might have been either a knight or a servant, but in that case, they wouldn't be hiding and following her. Vivian was frightened and ran. She remembered that it could have been a thief who had gotten into the mansion, even though her father had beefed up security. The girl in a panic called Unan and asked him for help. Then he said that everything was fine, but she didn't believe him. It was Archduke Glenn, who had caught up with her and was already embracing her. Vivian was angry. She didn't understand why he had to follow and then scare her. The young man confusedly said that he missed her and wanted to surprise her. Lennox admitted that he missed it so much that he ran all the way here without stopping. Lady Lewis admitted that she was very frightened, so she asked him to approach her normally next time, not like today. He smiled and called her a rabbit. Vivian also didn't understand why he kept calling her a rabbit. After all, she was a human being, not an animal, even if she looked like one. Lennox, on the other hand, replied that no matter how much he looked at her, she looked like a rabbit. The girl took it as mockery, and the young man was already smiling and saying that he had prepared a present for her, so she had to stop being angry. They went into the house. Lennox built a fire in the fireplace, for he saw that his bride was very cold, and asked her to be careful in this weather. Though Vivian sulked, she wondered what kind of gift he had prepared. The gift was that he had something important to tell her. The young man already knew that her mother had given them the go-ahead to live together as spouses. All the gifts the man had given Annette had worked out, right according to Vivian's plan. They started drinking tea, and the girl asked when was the best time for her to move. He said she could do it right now. She couldn't today as she needed to pack, but she asked permission to take Emma with her. The Archduke agreed. The girl pondered what else she should take with her, as Lennox asked her if she had a personal knight. He kind of was, but they changed often, as she was good at running away from them, so her father was very worried about it. The Count often changed the knights that guarded her, but it didn't help. But she didn't want to tell her fiancé about it, lest he yell at her. So the girl said that her personal knight was on vacation right now, so no one was guarding her. But Lennox didn't really believe her about it. Vivian assured her future husband that her knight was very handsome. The Archduke looked quite concerned and asked if that knight was more handsome than him. Vivian thought he couldn't be saying something like that and believing it. So she hugged her and told her that Lennox was the most beautiful man in the world to her. The young man hugged her too, and said that she was a very sly girl as she wanted to comfort him in this way. Vivian demanded that the Archduke show her the gift already, as she might have gibbered something unnecessary about the beautiful people around her. The young man realized perfectly well that she was changing the subject, so he decided to pretend that he hadn't noticed it, but only this time. And now he held out a beautiful pendant to her. It wasn't just a pendant, it was a locket. The man asked the girl to open it and see what was inside. The Archduke asked the girl why she was looking at him like that. She said he had a very sweet expression on his face. Vivian admitted that the man had an expression between embarrassment and crying, which made her want to hug him. The lady told her fiancé that she thought she was beginning to understand why he bullied her every day. The girl thrust herself at him, and the young man asked her to open the locket first. But Vivian did what she wanted, which was to kiss his neck, continuing to provoke him. She decided to do something like this more often, as she liked the Archduke's reaction very much, since he had also done the same thing to her before. But the girl miscalculated, and the young man fell on her back and kissed her. Vivian looked indignantly at her fiancé as he was too good at kissing. Lennox wouldn't let her go and said he was good at other interesting things, so she realized he was a trickster. The Archduke had asked her to open the locket already. In addition, he hinted to the girl that if she had not kissed him first, he would have kept his hands to himself as well. And inside was a portrait of the little Archduke. She clutched the gift to her chest, for it was what she wanted so badly. He was even cuter in the portrait than he was now. It was the best gift he'd ever given her. She noted that in the photo his gaze was cold and indifferent, as it was now. The Archduke was amazed that she saw him that way, but it wasn't true. Everyone saw him that way, except her. That was the secret he was hiding, that very portrait. But he realized that the bride wanted very much to see the way he looked when he was little. Vivian really liked the way he looked at the time, but the young man didn't like this portrait, as there he is small, inept, incompetent, none. The Archduke admitted that he always did everything perfectly and was ahead of his peers, but even so, he wasn't taken seriously, so he hated his childhood. The girl realized that this was what had become his problem. The people around him were pushing him from all sides, and he had grown up early and was not interested in peers. Vivian suddenly realized that her fiancé's parents had had a hard time raising a brilliant child too. Because of his childhood traumas, he didn't want to show her this portrait, but he did, even though he didn't want her to see him helpless. After all, to her, he wanted to be the perfect man. The girl told him that she didn't care if he was perfect or not. She liked him just the way he was, real. Then she added that she did fall for his looks at first, but the more she got to know him, the more she liked him. So the young man shouldn't have hidden anything from her. She would love him anyway. After all this, he cried and wiped his tears with the sleeve of his jacket. Lennox admitted that he had never cried in his conscious life, nor did the girl remember seeing him with tears in his eyes. Now she understood why those around her called him the Ice Prince. This reaction to Vivian's words and actions puzzled and confused the man. He himself did not understand why he reacted this way. He was sure that Vivian was the cause of his tears, but she didn't understand how that could happen, because he started crying before she laughed. The man said he was never like this before he met the girl, but now he has the impression that he is going crazy, as his heart and soul is always with her. It frightened and surprised him that the self he had spent years building was beginning to crumble because of her. He was scared, but he didn't hate it, and he realized that this process couldn't be stopped. He kissed her hand and asked if she knew about golems. Lennox compared himself to them, as the one couldn't live without the manner of the wizard who had tamed him, so he could no longer live without Vivian. So he asked her to never leave him and take responsibility. Vivian smiled and said she would never leave him, so he needed to take care of her too. Saturday evening came, and Vivian decided to go to a party hosted by the Marquis of Morias, accompanied by Emma and her personal knight. The girl had passed by this mansion many times, but had never been inside, and now she was one of the Marquise's guests. Lennox, when she got ready for the banquet, said he would personally arrive at the end of it to take her home. As usual, Vivian didn't notice the girl approaching her, and noted that there were a lot of guests here today. The girl told Emma that she would not be frightened by such a thing, for her maid and Lord Lloyd came with her. Of the three of them, the knight looked very unreliable, and the girl assumed that he was frightened of such a crowd of aristocrats. But Lloyd told her that if a dangerous situation arose, he would protect her, as he was considered second in skill among knights after the Archduke. Vivian was still a little offended because he had called her a witch earlier, but she realised that by marrying the Archduke, all knights would become her subjects, so she decided to be magnanimous and patted the guy on the shoulder, telling him to do a good job today. After the lady praised him, he got embarrassed and tried to hide it, but he failed. Vivian noticed that Emma didn't like something about the whole thing, but it was time to get into the hall. At that moment, the spirit reminded her of herself and told her that she had forgotten about him. The girl apologised and wished him good luck. She realised she had a banquet waiting for her that promised to be anything but easy, but Vivian believed in herself, so she hoped she could handle everything. Lady Lewis knew almost all the guests in the hall, but there were some she was seeing for the first time. For herself, she made it a point to say hello to the people she knew, and as soon as the servant announced her name, all present fixed their eyes on her. The girl wished one of her friends was here, and also gave herself her word that she wouldn't trip and fall. At that very moment, the hostess of the evening came down and said hello to her. Vivian was at a loss for words, for she thought Lady Morius a very beautiful girl. Lady Lewis was a little at a loss as to what was going on, as Gwendolen took her under her arm and dragged her somewhere, leaving behind the people she socialised with at such soirees. She led the girl into the room and began to ask if Vivian and Lennox were really engaged. Vivian confirmed it. The Marquise behaved a little strangely and asked if it was true that the Archduke had fallen in love with Vivian at first sight. Lady Morius had already made up her own mind and said that it was surely fate, since Vivian and Lennox had fallen in love and become a couple. The Marquise also dreamed of loving someone so much. In general, she often imagined herself and the Archduke as a couple, as he was a real handsome man. Lady Morius was very curious and wanted to know the details of the love story of the Archduke and the Count's daughter. And the girl was ready to start talking, but the doors to the hall opened and Princess Eunice walked in. Vivian was surprised to see the stranger from the cafe, but even more surprised when she realised it was the same princess her lover had rejected. The Marquise said she had not invited this girl, and she was entirely on Lady Lewis's side. Gwendolen said Eunice was invited by her mum, as she knew Vivian would be uncomfortable, but she herself would support her, as they have a fan fraternity that is stronger than politics. Vivian, on the other hand, smiled very sweetly and openly, and said she felt better at the words of the hostess of the evening. In general, the situation pissed off Lady Lewis, as she did not dare to approach the princess, and running away was not an option, as she would be considered unworthy of the Archduke. So she decided to drink some champagne, and Asmodee appeared in front of her with a bottle. Vivian's mood was even worse, as she didn't like the prince, and on top of that, he started acting like a waiter out of the blue. It turned out he had been invited by Lady Morius, who was glowing with happiness that he had come, and Vivian mentally begged her not to fall for his sweet speeches and face. At this point, Vivian had a bad feeling, as he acted like he hadn't made a mess of things last time, but she continued not to allow herself to be called by his name. And Lady Morius had already begun to conjure up a love triangle between Lennox, Vivian and Asmodee. Vivian, however, realised that the prince didn't like her and just wanted to beat the Archduke. At the moment when he wanted to take her hand, Princess Eunice came up to them and addressed Vivian, saying that she was glad to see her. Meanwhile, Lennox was worried sick about his fiancée, but he wasn't going to quit his job so as not to overwork his assistant Kyle. But the assistant yelled at him and sent him to his fiancée, as he was starting to go crazy with his boss. Since he was so insistent, Lennox got dressed and left, and Kyle cried since he wanted to find a girlfriend too. Gwendolen's mother had purposely planned it this way, as she wanted to ruin Vivian's reputation so that the Archduke would abandon her. Meanwhile, the princess introduced herself to the girl and asked her to tell her her name. The princess looked at the girl and she reminded her of a cute rabbit that she really wanted to pet, but then she thought that the stranger had fallen in love with her. Since Vivian was silent, she was introduced to the princess by Lady Morius, not forgetting to say that she was the fiancée of Archduke Glenn. At first, Eunice was silent, but then she said that the Archduke was a good judge of people. She thought that he disliked all people, so this meeting was an eye-opener for her. The princess invited Vivian to go with her to the buffet, and Lady Morius realised that it was time for the Archduke to appear and rescue the bride. But then Asmodee took the floor and said that this would not do. After all, Lady Lewis had promised him to go with him to hear the piano. While Prince Asmodee and Princess Eunice were arguing over which of them came first and with whom Lady Lewis would go, Archduke Glenn entered the hall and made his way toward his bride. He caught a very interesting picture as his bride was surrounded by a cousin, a groupie, and a girl who insisted on marrying him. Vivian immediately ran up to him, and he said he came early as he missed her a lot. The girl invited the groom to listen to the piano playing, and Asmodee realised that they were trying to blow him off by any means, so he told his cousin that since he had an unrequited love, at least he could watch it. This remark of the young man added fuel to the fire of Lady Morius's imagination, who had already imagined something of the kind. But not only did Asmod claim the attention of his cousin's fiancée, Eunice was also interested in the girl. Sensing the girl's mood and condition, Lennox led her into the room with the piano, and then asked her a little afterward whether she had come to her senses or not. The girl admitted that she wanted to be one-on-one with her fiancé, and then she asked if he wanted to hear her play. She began to play. The girl felt the stares of others on her all the time, but next to him she would not be able to make a single mistake. It was the second favourite song that Lennox was the first to hear. All the other aristocrats were enchanted by her playing, and Gwendolyn's mother was angry. The Archduke liked the tune and promised that he would play it to her too when they were alone. The prince applauded her and asked if she disliked him that much. The guy was very sad, but here was no one who existed for her but the Archduke. Lennox and Asmodee started to argue again, but Vivian intervened and said she wanted to clear the air once more. The girl said that her feelings for Lennox will not change, even on pain of death, so she asks him very much to remember him. And then she grabbed the Archduke by the arm and led him away from the banquet hall. They went out, and in the hallway they saw Princess Eunice being told off by some girl. Lennox hugged his bride tightly and said he didn't understand why she would want to talk to Princess Eunice Ibran. The princess already knew that she had nothing to gain with the Archduke, but though their marriage would be beneficial to the country, there was another, more difficult way of doing it. The Archduke asked the princess how she would make arrangements with the emperor, but the girl smiled and said the man needed to pay attention to something else, but what she wouldn't tell him out of spite. The banquet ended and Vivian and the Archduke packed for home, being met outside by Emma and Lord Lloyd. The maid noticed that the man looked different after the banquet, which worried the hostess. The girl realised that after meeting Princess Eunice, something had changed in her fiancé. Everyone around him noticed it. She regarded him, and it did not escape the Archduke's gaze. He asked her why she was looking at him like that. To distract her fiancé from his thoughts, Vivian kissed him. That impressed him, so afterward he hugged her and told her he wanted only him to know how sweet she was. The man was glad that his beloved was able to fight back against the Crown Prince, but he wasn't about to let his guard down. They arrived at the estate, and the Archduke said that tomorrow he would be living with her under the same roof. Vivian realised that her fiancé was having a hard time today, so she offered to fulfill one request of his. The next day, the girl waited for the carriage at the gate of the house, for she had already had time to say goodbye to her relatives before. At that moment, she felt a little sadness at leaving her home, though she realised she could come here when she missed it. The Archduchess was waiting at the entrance for her daughter-in-law, and was delighted to see her. The woman confessed that she and her husband had prepared a gift for her, and offered to see it quickly. In the window of the workroom, Vivian saw her lover, who had leaped over the railing down toward her. Vivian started scolding him as she was very scared for his health. The Archduchess was, however, calm, for she knew very well that her son had excellent physical attributes. The Archduke then wanted to personally escort the bride to her room, but his mother stopped him and said that the girl should first appreciate her gift. Since both insisted on a gift first, Lennox decided to give in. They took Vivian to the door of one of the rooms and told her that everything there was now hers. It was full of beautiful but expensive and heirloom items. Vivian didn't realise what she should do with all those things. Isabella said the girl could do whatever she wanted with those things, even sell them. Lennox then showed her to her room, and the girl was getting ready for bed when he asked her to come up to him. Talking them over went as usual to the point where he had her up against the wall, but promised that they wouldn't get to the most interesting part until the wedding. Then he pulled out his bunny-style pajamas and asked the girl to put them on. The girl refused, as she did not like the eternal comparisons of her to a rabbit or a bunny. But then I gave in and wore this cute outfit. The Archduke, however, kept teasing her, so she tried hitting him. Vivian realized that she had been foolish to make such a promise to the Archduke, for she should have foreseen something like this. Afterward, he lifted the girl in his arms and carried her to bed. She didn't like the fact that the young man was overly pleased with his act, but still remained very sweet. Vivian started kicking and demanding that the young man give her back her clothes, as it was very uncomfortable to sleep in that. He decided to tell her he burned it all in the fireplace, and she seemed to believe it. Lennox put her in bed and told her it was time for bed. Since the man wouldn't give her normal clothes, she decided to take off those pajamas and sleep without them. She was left unclothed, and Lennox fell to the floor in surprise. Vivian, on the other hand, was sitting on the bed covered by a sheet. Since there was nothing left for him to do but lie in bed too and turn his back on Vivian, he thought it was a new kind of torture. But he didn't last long like that and tried again to get her to put on her pajamas. The girl resisted, as she didn't want to put that thing on herself. Eventually, he managed to wrap her in something. Lennox demanded that the girl cover up and go to bed in peace, but she didn't understand why he was setting this up and promised to buy wolf pajamas and make him wear them. Afterward, he kissed her passionately, and then she accidentally touched his bare chest, and the man was electrocuted. This moment contributed to the girl putting on her pajamas. They were already in bed. Vivian was looking at him so hard he told her that if she continued, he would lose control. He ended up staying up all night staring at the ceiling. Morning came, but Lennox did not show up for breakfast. Vivian asked Emma where the Archduke was and if he had eaten. The maid replied that the man was working in his study and said he would not have breakfast. This news made Vivian feel hungry too. At that moment, the girl realized that her Geminis couldn't get a proper sleep tonight because of her. So after a while, she came running into the kitchen and asked Emma to teach her how to make a simple dessert. All the servants were surprised. The chef got nervous too, so he asked what had brought the girl into the kitchen if something was wrong. She confessed that she wanted to borrow the kitchen from him for a while. With the help of Emma and the chef, she made an egg tart. The girl stood under the door of the study and hesitated to enter, for she did not know whether her lover would like the treat. But then she noticed the Archduke lying on the sofa, so she went into the study to check on him. And then he smiled and said that because she had hesitated for so long, he had decided to go for a ruse. The girl didn't understand how he figured it out. The man said she was like an open book to him. The Archduke apologized to his bride for leaving her alone at breakfast today. Now he wanted to take her and run away to the ends of the earth. But Vivian said they can't do that as his aide will suffer from it. The girl realized that she needed to calm the Archduke down quickly so he could get back to work. She asked the groom why he skipped breakfast. The man admitted that he was very busy in the morning. So now the girl admitted that she had made dessert for him. His mood crept upward. The Archduke looked closely at his bride and smiled happily, realizing that she had done this for him. Emma brought an egg tart into her host's office, and the host praised Vivian for learning to cook a little. The girl admitted that before, she hadn't cooked anything, so this time she had a chef helping her. Lennox tasted it and said it was delicious since Vivian had made it for him. After tasting it, the young man said the dessert tasted like the taste of love, so he would love for her to make him something else. Afterward, they started talking about the wedding. It was exactly 1 month away, so all the time would be taken up with preparations. The girl was going to take an active part in the preparations to show everyone what she was capable of and not leave everything to the Archduke. Lennox stood up. Since he was now scheduled to have a knight's practice, Vivian asked to go with him and watch. But he wouldn't let her, for he didn't want his knights ogling her. Vivian still insisted on doing her own thing, since after their wedding they would become her subordinates as well. He agreed, but on the condition that she do something for him, and carried her onto the practice field in his arms. The knights noticed that their lord was smiling and had a very warm look in his eyes. When Lennox set her on the ground, she formally introduced herself. The knights came up one by one, bowed to her, introduced themselves and swore their allegiance. Each of them could feel the Archduke's gaze on them as he stood behind his bride's back, and he promised them death if anything happened. But as soon as Vivian approached him, he became adequate again. She asked permission to speak to all the knights to memorize their names. Lennox asked the bride if she was going to smile sweetly at everyone. The knights mentally began to ask the girl to spare them. She made a pretty face, and the Archduke gave her permission. The acquaintance ended, and the girl went up to her room. She began to compile the guest list for the wedding, and there turned out to be a great many of them, as this celebration was so honourable a person. The girl realised that she had made only a quarter of the necessary preparations, but as soon as Lennox came into the room, she ran to hug him and asked if his parents were back. He answered uncertainly. The Archduke informed her that he had received an invitation to a banquet at the Imperial Palace, where the Emperor himself would be present. Vivian knew he didn't like such events, but this time he'd decided to attend, and that was saying something. Vivian didn't want to go there, but now she had no choice. The girl was very worried this time, though she realised that her parents, Marina and Lennox's parents, would be there as well. It was time for dinner, but neither she nor he had any appetite, for they were worried. The girl suddenly asked about the relationship between the prince and the Archduke. Lennox admitted that he hates his cousin, and Asmod has an inferiority complex. He wanted to defeat the Archduke all the time, and thus get rid of his complexes. Lennox feared that this time the prince planned to take his beloved away from him. So it was time for the banquet. Duke liked the venue very much. In the garden she saw Marina and Cassian arguing, as the young man did not like the future husband of the girl, whom her parents had chosen for her. Lennox came up to them and said that in his opinion, Cassian and Marina were a very good couple. And so the Emperor and Asmodee walked into the garden, causing a wave of admiration. A shiver ran through Vivian as the prince smiled at her. The girl was absorbed in herself and did not notice that it was her turn to go to the Emperor to greet him. Lennox escorted her to the place where the Emperor sat on the throne. When they entered, the Archduke bowed low and said that he hoped that Asta, Roberti and Elpidian was in good health. After him, Vivian bowed, introduced herself, and said she was honoured to be here. His Majesty asked the girl to relax, as they would soon become one family. But Vivian was still tense, which the Emperor told her, at which the Archduke asked him why he was tormenting his bride. Lennox was about to take his bride and leave, but his uncle asked if he didn't want to say hello to his cousins who would be there soon. The young man admitted that he wanted to do just that. The first to appear was Diane, who immediately approached Vivian and told her that she looked great. Israfel appeared after her and remarked that his sister liked to be the centre of attention, and then he greeted Lennox and asked how he was doing. The Archduke replied coldly that he was fine, and his cousin remarked that he had not expected any other answer. The Emperor noted that not only had the tribesman not changed, but his son hadn't changed either, and asked Eliza for confirmation of his words. Eliza smiled and agreed with the Emperor. She said that her favourite person was like an evergreen tree. After these words, the Emperor's second son fled from the hall. Vivian watched the scene in bewilderment, and Asta apologised for his son to Eliza, hoping he would grow up soon. Everyone returned to the hall. Asmode came up to Vivian and asked her to dance. The girl refused him, citing that her legs hurt, but then he asked her to at least talk to him. The man asked the girl about whether she thought he was only interested in her because of the Archduke. Vivian thought so, for she knew of his irresistible desire to defeat Lennox at any cost. The prince didn't hide the fact that initially it was like that, but then there was another reason. So he asked the girl to think of him in a positive way, because maybe he had feelings for her too. The situation was getting out of hand, so Eliza intervened and asked the prince to move away from Lady Lewis, since they had arranged to meet much earlier, so he was in their way a bit. The girl asked if Vivian was all right, and Vivian said she could breathe out now. Elise, on the other hand, invited the Archduke's bride to visit the conservatory. Vivian was surprised, as there were even herbs there this time. Eliza said that they had planted them recently, as the Emperor had started to like herbal tea. They were having a good conversation, exactly until they heard the sound of the door locking. Vivian was the first to realise that the door had been closed from the outside. Eliza didn't understand who needed it. They jerked the handle and realised that the door could only be opened from the other side. But then Unan called out, and Vivian realised she could ask him for help, and told her new acquaintance. Lady Lewis said she would ask the spirit to reassemble people about their situation, and since they are near the banquet hall, it wouldn't take long. Eliza said it was better to tell those who could really help them, not everyone. It was a great idea, so Vivian asked Unan to find the Archduke and tell him that she and Lady Eliza were locked in the conservatory. Lady Lewis asked Lady Eliza not to worry, for her spirit was very clever and would quickly find Lennox and he would come running here. And everything would have been fine, but a fire started. Meanwhile, Lennox was walking around the hall trying to find his fiancée. who not long ago was still in his sights. And then he caught her spirit and asked him at once where his mistress was. The girls went to the door as the fire was spreading very quickly, and it was very unsafe elsewhere. And then Unraveling appeared, and Vivian asked him to put out the fire, which he did, and then Lennox came running in and kicked the dower into the conservatory. As soon as he was in the wake, he immediately embraced the bride. The Count and Countess ran in after him, and the Archduke said that it was necessary to catch the culprit of the accident on the hot trail. Isabella was also determined, and said that this man would pay for what he had done. To do so, she summoned her spirit, Seraphim, and ordered him to search the mansion. Vivian also wanted to help with Unan's help. At first, the spirits started to figure things out amongst themselves. Since that was the case, the Archduchess asked Vivian to show herself in all her glory, and the spirits flew to do their master's bidding. Vivian's spirit was the first to find something. Everyone ran to where Unan called, and there Lady Lewis saw a man. That man was Baron Rugg, who was beating himself up in hysterics. A few minutes earlier, the Baron had been watching the aristocrats at the reception. He had had enough to drink, but he still went on and considered everyone to be Sickheimers and pretenders. So he saw Princess Eunice in the crowd talking to her assistant. He went up to her and told her that he knew she had something wrong. The princess looked at the man and asked who he was. He said something to her while looking at Vivian and Eliza, who were talking to each other. The princess looked at him contemptuously and said that she had heard of people spreading rumours about Lady Vivian before, but she had not expected such a person to start a conversation with her. The man escaped, but he followed Lady Lewis, and he felt resentful of being shamed because of a man who used black magic. He watched Princess Eliza laughing next to Vivian and concluded that the latter was just as much of a witch. The Baron was captured and tied up, and he planned to lock the girls in the greenhouse and set it on fire so they would be tortured there. But no matter what he said, no matter how much he begged, no matter how much he cried, Lennox Glen now sat before him in the worst possible mood, confirming his nickname and fame. The Baron was almost crying. He asked the Archduke to believe him that he had only locked the door, but he had had nothing to do with the fire. Lennox was silent. His Majesty interrupted the silence. He said that in that room and in that fire, his fiancée had almost died, and that the culprit had not a drop of remorse before him, but he still dared to ask him for something. The Baron realized that he had to change his tactics. He began to say that he was very drunk, so he didn't know what he was doing. Now he realized everything. He realized that he had committed a mortal sin. As soon as the Archduke heard this, he stood up, walked over to the man, and kicked him. The man fell on his back, and Lennox slowly approached him, saying that he would not be able to escape severe punishment. His Highness quietly, ingratiatingly, but at the same time clearly said that the Baron would lose his title, all his property, become trash at the feet of the aristocrats, whom no one would even consider as a man. But the man had a choice. He could choose execution if he didn't want the life described above. Now the Archduke was smiling. He asked the man on the floor again what he would choose. A life that was like hell or death. After beating him well, Lennox went out, put on his jacket, and said that this man could not say anything more, so further investigation should be handled by the Emperor's men. As the Archduke went upstairs, he thought, and he did not like the conclusions, for, supposing that the Baron had only closed the door and run off to drink further, then it's obvious that someone else did the arson, someone they haven't found yet. Assuming the perpetrator told the truth, a man so fearless that he dared to attack his family and the girl he loved appeared. Lennox was aware that he could not make another mistake now. Upstairs among the crowd, a worried Vivian was waiting for him. She smiled at him, and the young man made the decision that he would protect her at all costs. He smiled back at her, and the girl threw herself around his neck, hugging him tightly, and he realized clearly at that moment that he belonged next to her. Some time passed. The incident was over. She even began to correspond with Princess Eliza and continued to cook. She was even making progress. Every time the Archduke heard her desserts, his face expressed an extreme degree of happiness, so she couldn't get enough of him. Just now she brought him some goodies, carefully opened the door to the study, and asked permission to enter. The girl had not expected to see before her so doomed and gloomy a picture, for both the Archduke and his assistants were tired and in a complete state of decay. But as soon as Lennox heard his lover's voice, he immediately began to smile, inviting her in. This time baked a big pie for Lennox to share with the helpers.